they're going to be around.
Chair, I'm just going to ask Hayley to try resetting the slideshow so it comes up without the preview as the next slide.
Understood. Go ahead.
Thanks, Hayley. Hayley, do you want to try bringing that back up on screen again? The plan's just doing it as a start from slideshow and see if it will come up without the preview, please.
Well, you shouldn't have done. I put your laptop on mute. I don't know. Yes, I think it's just going to see your headset. Right, you're happy, Mike? I don't know what's causing it.
That's it, Chair. Thank you very much. And thank you, Hayley.
Right, it's 6:30 and I shall commence this meeting of the Development Control Committee in virtual session. Is everybody still getting an echo? Yes? We're going to have to do something about this.
Yes.
One, two, still there. Thank you. Must be a Zoom issue because we didn't have this trouble with Teams in the previous meeting. I'll continue. For the benefit of the members of the public watching or participating in this meeting, I'd like to explain who everybody is. My name is Councillor Paul Miller and I'm the chairman of this committee. This committee meeting is being held virtually in accordance with the Council's rules for virtual meetings, which reflects the published government regulations implementing the Coronavirus Act. The meeting is being streamed live on YouTube and will also be available to view after the meeting is finished. Councillors who sit on this committee and who will be making the decisions on the applications before us are identified by name on the screen. Ward councillors addressing the committee will be introduced by name. Can I ask the officers who will be advising the committee to introduce themselves and their role?
Evening, Chair. My name is Mike Townsend. I'm the Planning and Development Manager. The other officers will introduce themselves now. And at the end, we do have a officer from Hampshire Highways who will introduce himself at the end of that roll call.
I'm Ruth Miller. I'm the head of service.
Hi, I'm Andrew Rushmore, Principal Planning Policy Officer.
And Chair, I believe we have Mark Philcox from Hampshire Highways with us as well.
Yes, hi, Mark Philcox from Hampshire County Council Highways.
Good evening, Mark. Thank you for being here. Could you introduce yourself? Andrew?
Andrew, Civil Services.
I think that's it. Mike, okay. The Developmental Control Committee is a regulatory committee. I'm sorry, but we've got this horrible echo. I'm afraid Anne cannot interface with this. We can't find IT either, so I'm sorry. We have, I have Anne Greaves with me and she'll be monitoring the meeting. The Development Control Committee is a regulatory committee and not a political meeting. The committee will be assessing the material brought before us and listening to the representations made, and will make decisions based on planning reasons. In reaching these decisions, we are guided by national and local planning policy and guidance. I understand that planning decisions can be emotive and ask that everybody remains polite and professional and patient throughout the meeting in case of any slight delay in presentations. I will now remind both members and officers of the procedures that will be in use as this meeting is virtual. Unless speaking, officers will have their videos switched off to provide clarity as to who the committee members are for those watching and participating. At this point, can I ask all officers present to switch off their video? The officers present will only switch their video link on during the item that they are presenting or where they wish to be invited to speak by me as chair. For this virtual meeting, councillors should observe the normal rules of behaviour under the Member Code of Conduct and ensure they are not disturbed during the meeting. Can members ensure that their mobile phones are now switched off or on silent? The members of the committee turn on their video link during the meeting and keep their microphones muted unless they've been invited to speak by the chair. Members are reminded that if they switch off their video link or move away from the camera, they'll be treated as leaving the meeting and will not be able to take part in any vote on the item under discussion. Members can indicate they wish to speak by raising their hand and should only speak when I as chair invite them to do so. When we move into debate of the applications, may I ask all committee members to avoid repetition and keep any comments on each agenda item to a maximum of 4 minutes. As chair, I'll confirm the name of any visiting speaker at the appropriate time in the agenda before they address the committee by audio link. Councillors should state if they have any declaration of interest or if they have predetermined an item on the agenda that they are then leaving the meeting and switch off their video link. They can then switch on their video link and rejoin when I call the next agenda item. Where a member of the committee that has had a predetermined position on an application and is registered to speak under the public speaking scheme, they will stand down from the meeting and will only be able to participate as a visiting councillor by audio link. They will then rejoin the meeting as a member of the committee once the application has been determined. At the appropriate time, I will invite speakers to contribute to the meeting by audio link in the order set out in the update paper, but I reserve the right to reorder the speaking in the event of the technical difficulties occur. I will ask each speaker to confirm their name and interest in the item before commencing their contribution. I would ask that points made by visiting speakers are material planning considerations relating to facts. May I ask all speakers, including visiting members, to speak clearly and to keep points made on the application to material reasons only. Any questions from members of the committee to speakers should be related to matters of fact related to the application and not opinion. No further dialogue between members of the committee and speakers will be permitted once questioning is finished. All speakers will be reminded of their permitted speaking time and will be advised when they have 1 minute remaining. Voting will be taken by a roll call and will confirm the recommendation that is to be, and I will confirm the recommendation that is to be voted upon before the voting begins. When each member unmutes their microphone to vote, they can leave a small pause before speaking to allow their vote to be heard. Each member will then indicate whether they are for or against the recommendation or whether they wish to abstain. Hopefully, we will not have any IT problems, but can I remind councillors that if their connection is lost, that they should immediately advise the Democratic Support Officer and use their meeting link to access the meeting again. Right, we will start the main agenda, and item number 1, apologies for absence and substitutions. I did have a look and I think that everybody is present. Are there any declarations of interest? And could I have the full screen up so I can see the committee, please? Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? I see nobody indicating for that. And there are no urgent matters. Minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of March. I will move that minutes of the meeting will be signed as the correct record unless there are any comments as a matter of accuracy contained within those minutes that have been circulated. I see no comments, so I will eventually be signing those minutes of further date. We move on to applications. And the first application I will call Mr. Julian Jones, please. I see you appear on the screen, Julian. Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening.
And if you'd just like to sit tight while the planning officer introduces the item. You're on mute, Sue. And now we can't hear you. Now we can hear you. I think you're on, your mic's on.
Thank you, Chair. Item number 1, this is an outline application for the demolition of...
Sorry, could you bring your microphone closer to your...
And construction of commercial class...
Sorry, Sue.
B8 units, including mezzanine...
Sue, can you hear me?
...offices, associated infrastructure works...
Can you hear me, Sue? No, she can't hear me.
Okay, Chair. So if I carry on, so associated infrastructure works and full details of site levels, drainage and diversion of underground pipeline. All matters are reserved except access arrangements. The outline application also includes the provision of a bund south of the M3. If I draw members' attention to the update paper, the first item on page 5 with regards to biodiversity, there are 2 reasons for refusal that were on the original paper. An amended parameters plan has now been received, and that's outlined on page 5, and that's now providing a 10-metre wide buffer, wide green corridor between zones 1 and 2, and that will improve connectivity across the site. As such, the biodiversity officer has now recommending that the application is approved subject to a condition, and officers are now recommending that reason for refusal number 2 is withdrawn. The third reason for refusal we get related to skylarks, and further additional information has been received from the applicant. And as a result, the biodiversity officer has confirmed that his concerns have been overcome and that the reason for refusal number 3 no longer applies, and officers will confirm that reason for refusal number 3 has been withdrawn. I'd also draw your attention on the update paper to additional consultee comments that have been received, as well as comments from members of the public. And those have been addressed on pages, the comments they've raised have been addressed on page 10 of the update paper. I'll draw your attention to the oil pipeline. They have withdrawn their objection following consultation with regards to the Toucan crossing, and they're now recommending that an informative be added. I would therefore draw your attention to page 13 of the update paper with regard to the amended recommendation, but firstly bringing to your attention page 182 of the main officer's report and the planning balance and overall conclusion page, which identifies the different levels of weight afforded to different aspects of the proposal. On that basis, the recommendation is for refusal on 2 grounds, as stated on page 13 of the update paper. First one relating to landscape harm and impact, and the second one in the absence of a legal agreement. On page 13 of the update paper, there's also some amendments to the draft conditions should you be minded to approve the application. And they are outlined on page 13 and page 14 of the update paper. So just to confirm, the application is recommended for refusal on 2 grounds as outlined on page 13 of the update paper. I'd also bring to your attention and remind members that the application is the subject of a call-in request, which is being considered by the Planning Casework Unit at MCLG. And once the decision is made here, we're required to notify them of the decision, and then they will consider the call-in request.
Is that it, Sue?
That's it, Councillor. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Jones, you have 4 minutes, bearing in mind that the committee has had a sight of the Dummer Parish Council, extensive Dummer Parish Council input into the report and an update in the update paper. You have 4 minutes. Here you go.
Okay, it's a significant application that you're considering. While constrained by COVID-19 pandemic, there have been no physical meetings and no committee site viewing. I hope despite the lockdown, you've been able to find your way to the site in the recent months to see the massive changes already in place in the parish. I was astonished by the leader's comments in his interview with the Gazette. He expressed the view that Dummer residents would find it difficult, but is quoted as saying, life must move on, we have to adapt to change. If he read his own local plan, he would know it requires that over 2,000 new houses are built in the parish. 400 have already been built and a further 1,750 are under construction on Hounston Fields and the Basingstoke Golf Club sites, along with realignment of the A30. Dummer has accepted more change than most parishes in Basingstoke. It is the safety, health and quality of life for the residents of Ganderdown and those new homes that must be protected from the 24-hour traffic movements, noise and intrusive industrial lighting. This development is likely to destroy real jobs in the rural economy as well as Basingstoke's manufacturing and retail sector while importing manufacturing goods from elsewhere in the world. Parish Dummer Council has objected to the application because of its opinion it's contrary to policies of the local plan and the MPPF. Policy CN7, the essential and facilities and services, EM1 landscape, EM4 biodiversity, nature conservation, EP1 economic growth and investment, and EP4 the rural economy, and the NPPF section 180. Highways have requested that several conditions should be imposed, that B8 should be excluded, that B8 parcels should be excluded, that HGVs should leave and enter the site directly from the junction 7 and only during restricted hours. It's not possible to impose conditions to enforce these, and only the operations management plan for the operation of the site and the site delivery management plan during construction allow them to do that, but there's no provision for monitoring these plans. Where will HGVs wait if they arrive during the restricted hours? They cannot park on the M3. There are reports in the press of HGVs parking around similar facilities, generating large amounts of litter and using verges to perform bodily functions. A Freedom of Information request revealed that junction 5 to 9 on the M3 have been closed either fully or for lane closures over 900 times in the last 3 years period. When these closures occur, HGVs and local will have to use local roads travelling through Brighton Hill, Southam to get to junction 6, or even continuing on to the M4, continuing through Popley, Chinham, Sherford and Loddon.
You have 3/4 of a minute.
Okay, there could be 1,200 additional HGVs travelling through Basingstoke. This regional facility doesn't just affect Dummer residents, but residents throughout the borough. The leader of Hampshire County Council has objected, expressing concern about the lack of consultation and the impact on neighbouring planning authorities. But the local impact on Dummer will be considerable, as motorists avoiding the congestion on the A30 will rat run through the village where there are no pavements and children play. Thank you, that's it.
Thank you very much, Julian. Members, any questions to the parish councillor? Can I have the screen back, please? Thank you. Are there any questions for the parish councillor? I don't see anybody indicating for questions. Thank you very much. Now, Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. I couldn't get to raise my hand for some reason. Julian, you said it would destroy real jobs. If this facility isn't built here, it's going to be built somewhere. And I understand that warehousing can destroy real jobs generally in the retail sector. But how do you consider it's going to destroy real jobs in the Basingstoke area?
Well, certainly a couple of years ago, I'm not sure of the absolutely up-to-date statistics, but we had 400 people living in the village, but 800 people working here. Partly that was because they could get very good access to the M3. I think those in, say, Southern Communications on this side of the south side of the motorway will find it extremely difficult to get on to the junction 7 once the houses are built out and this development goes ahead. So that could remove local jobs in the village. More widely, as I say, if we're producing a distribution centre, which we understand could be for a multinational or international company that satisfies online retail, certainly most of the products I bought from that are not manufactured in the UK, and certainly not in any industries in Basingstoke. And as you've already said, Festival Place, that used to be one of the top retail centres in the southeast, already is boarded up because of COVID, but is unlikely to recover after this if we have a huge distribution centre in this area.
Any more questions on that, Councillor Robertson? Right, thank you very much, Councillor Jones.
Okay, thank you, Chairman.
Can I now call upon Mr. Stephen Reid, Mr. Paul Beavers, and Mr. J. Northam?
Hello, I think Mr. Northam's going to go first.
Gentlemen, I have no problem who goes first. You have it between you a total of 4 minutes. Is everybody there? Yes, I can see you're all there now. So you have 4 minutes, off you go.
Okay, my name's Geoffrey Northam. I'm a Dummer resident. Stantec, the experts appointed by BDBC, in their very thorough report, indicate the many flaws in the application, which officers recognise, but suggest the committee should view pragmatically. The tree officer originally objected to the application because of the removal of category A and B trees, including one group of 67 mature oaks. With time and pressure, he now argues that TPOs are not necessary as trees are not under immediate threat of removal. When they are, it will be too late, of course. If approved, you will have been bounced by developers who are experts at playing the UK planning system, with very late submissions of reports and no chance for public comment. All this for the benefit of their South African hedge fund investors. Linked to this are very real concerns about the handling of the application. We've made freedom of information requests which have been handled incorrectly. This is now the subject of a review by Russell O'Keefe, the chief executive. This, together with an inappropriate article by the in the Basingstoke Gazette yesterday by the leader of the council, raises very serious doubts about the fairness of this process. I urge you to refuse this application for the reasons above. And I now pass over to Mr. Beavers.
Thank you. My interest is environmental and planning policy. Residents were told that they had a stake and a say in the proper planning of their area. The local plan was approved through the proper process. The NPPF has been updated and changes increasingly protect our environment. As well as being outside the local plan and the SPB, these applications are deliberately timed to avoid scrutiny by the proper process. The next local plan includes big issues for this borough, like health, high-value local employment, planning for the restoration of and access to nature, energy, and consumption. The developer is desperate to avoid proper scrutiny, worried that it would inevitably lead to refusal. This council is either a bulwark against speculative development or abandons any pretense that anywhere in our community has a stake in the proper planning of the area. Please reject both applications. Thank you.
We now move on to Councillor Reid.
Unmute. Right, I had been muted and I've just been invited to unmute. Mr. Chairman, the site, as Paul Beavers has just said, is outside the settlement policy boundary. So my understanding is that that means that the presumption is against allowing it to be developed at this time. I also ask you to consider the contradictions in the decisions you're being invited to take, turning down the outline permission but granting the full permission. What you're being invited to say is that you recognise that the development of the full site is for various reasons unsustainable, but you'll allow work to start on it anyway. In the words of Magnus Magnusson, I can't finish, so I'll start. The Hampshire, and we've got Mr. Wilcox on, so he will comment, has asked for a condition to prevent traffic being released onto the A30, which runs through my division, at peak times. I take this as an indication that there are traffic problems associated with this development, and if it goes ahead, there are going to be severe traffic problems associated with this development, and I think it is a traffic load too far. The best position, Mr. Chairman, I think that the committee can take tonight is to turn down both applications, allow the council time to develop fully its emerging vision for the southwest of Basingstoke, and then take planning decisions with a better idea of what the end picture will be. Thank you, Chair.
I'll ask you to wind up, please.
Finished.
Thank you. Right, members, questions to the speakers. Thank you. Councillor McCormick, you do that, your hand is not in your camera vision.
Sorry, Chair, I had it electronically raised as well.
I'll make something clear. I've got an arrangement here that I can see your faces. I do not, because the screen is about 3 meters from me, I need to say visual hands this time. It's because of the arrangement, electronic arrangement we have here. Thank you.
Okay, so my question is to Paul Beavers. So there have been some slight tweaks to the plan with a hedgerow corridor through here, but in your assessment, what is the ecological impact of this plan? I mean, it's a very large piece of land that's being built on.
Primarily, my view is that we've not done the planning that we should do, that we should be doing through the new local plan revision. So what we've got is a speculative development when there are opportunities for creating corridors between the northwest.
I'm sorry, I'm going to stop this.
Sorry.
Councillor McCormack, you asked a question of an opinion. We've had this before in other meetings. Opinion, it has to be to a matter of fact. The fact that the speaker comes back about we haven't done the planning properly is not pertinent to this application. If it's matters of fact applying to this particular application, I'd quite happily accept the questions. So if you could frame your question around the application, specifically to facts, material to planning, I'd be very grateful.
I don't know.
No, Mr. Beaver, I'm addressing this to Councillor McCormack.
Okay, right. So what I'm trying to get is an idea of the impact on the ecological impact of this site. Because I had a submission from you, Mr. Beavers, gratefully received on that.
The proposal is virtually to wreck a line, an avenue of 67 oak trees. That's in the plan. And I do not believe that either the calculations of impact or the honesty of the developer, quite frankly, reflects what should be expected of his submission. I hope I'm trying to answer that reasonably well.
Yeah, that's fine.
Fair enough. Yep. Thank you very much. Any more questions to the speakers? See none. Thank you very much, gentlemen. If I could ask Ms. Davis, Mr. Barker, and Mr. Houghton, please.
Good evening.
Good evening. Who's speaking, please?
It's Daniel Houghton.
Good evening, Mr. Houghton. And do I believe that you'll be speaking for the applicant?
Yes, I'm going to be speaking for the first minute, and then my colleague's going to follow.
Okay, fine. The clock starts now. Thank you.
Good evening, councillors. I'm Daniel Houghton, the applicant's landscape architect. I'd like to make two key points. Firstly, I respectfully disagree with your landscape officer who objects to this application. The proposed bund and significant tree planting would not only provide appropriate screening for the residents of Dunmer Village, would also help the scheme sit comfortably in its surroundings. This matches the council's own vision document for this part of Basingstoke, which recommends maintaining strategic gaps between villages, including appropriate landscape features. This is exactly what we're proposing, a strategic gap between our proposal and Dunmer, with a carefully designed landscape feature, the bund, to protect nearby Dunmer. Secondly, the character of the A30 corridor will change regardless of our proposal because of the council's own vision for the area, including the health campus, housing and other anticipated development. Also, the landscape and visual impact from a previously consented hospital in this location was deemed acceptable. The visual impact on the A30 will mainly be experienced by those in vehicles passing by, and even this will reduce over time as the trees we plant grow. Thank you.
Good evening, councillors. I'm John Barker, Development Director at Newlands. Thank you for your time considering our proposals. We are committed to working in partnership with the council, the community and other stakeholders on this huge investment in Basingstoke. I want to say just 3 things in relation to our outline application. Firstly, as well as the much talked about occupier for the full application, we are now very close to signing agreements on the other plots too, those covered by the outline application. This is extremely good news because we are now talking about delivering more jobs and investment into the town at a time of economic uncertainty. Secondly, can I make it absolutely crystal clear that our proposal would help, not hinder, the delivery of a new hospital for the NHS Trust? We are investing heavily in off-site highway improvements, including building a new roundabout, which would serve our development and unlock the preferred site for the hospital, not only speeding up its potential delivery, but also reducing the cost to the NHS. Finally, we understand change of this scale will cause some concerns. As Dan explained, our landscaping is designed to minimise the impact on the residents of Dummer. Over the past few days, we have also been talking with the owners of Ganderdown Cottages to try and address their concerns over our proposals. As well as being major investors in Basingstoke, we do also want to be good neighbours. Thank you.
Good evening, councillors. My name is Jo Davis and I'm the planning agent for this application. I have 3 matters I wish to highlight. Highway capacity. Highways England and Hampshire County Council have no objection to this application, confirming the capacity of all junctions and highway networks can comfortably accommodate the trips generated from development. Please be reassured by these technical experts. Sustainability. The proposals support your climate emergency commitments, helping to deliver your carbon neutral goals in 3 ways. Our proposals include BREEAM Excellent rated, highly energy efficient buildings, on-site renewable energy generated in solar panels across all roofs, and extensive sustainable transport measures to encourage staff to use public transport and to cycle or walk to work. Jobs. Finally, at a time when job uncertainty and economic uncertainty is apparent, this proposal will not only create 1,400 new direct jobs and 2,025 indirect jobs, but will also inject £74 million per annum into the local economy.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Ms. Davis, but if you could wind up, please.
Absolutely. Policy EP1 of the local plan allows for this development to come forward and inward investment to be captured in your borough. Please take an unbalanced view with regard to this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions to the applicant? Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. 2 questions if I can. Could I ask Mr. Houghton, in terms of your statement of the landscape impact, how high above the bund will the building rise to at the southernmost point of the site? Putting trees aside for a moment, the specific point about the bund and the height of the building, how high above that bund will your building rise?
I'm not sure I can give maybe as clear an answer as you'd like, because it's all depend on where you're viewing it from. But we have reduced
how high the building is. That's my specific question. How high is the building going to be? Forgive me. Let me put it a different way.
I don't have that information.
Sorry, I've caught you out. I apologise.
So you've caught me off the. My colleagues may have that to hand, but we have produced photo montages that show what the impact to views, particularly those from Dummer, will be. These have been shown on helpfully on screen at the moment. There might be one that's a little further along, which shows the view from Dummer.
Well, that's a good view for my question, if I may, because that is the specific point I'm seeking to raise with you. How high above that bund does your building rise? And that's a pretty important question, I think.
Well, in this, the bund isn't visible. The bund is specifically proposed to mitigate visual impact from Dummer. So the bund is located on the south side of the M3 and doesn't provide any mitigation from the users of the A30, which is what this view shows.
Understood. Again, let me put my question. So in terms of the landscape element that is there in the front element of the visual beyond the building. It's how high does that building then rise in the context of its top height, as it were, the ridge line of that particular building.
Councillor Harvey, if I may add in,
Thank you.
plot 3, which is the only plot that you would see from Dummer, would have a maximum height of 15 metres. This is a parameter, so it's likely to be lower than that, but the maximum height would be 15 metres.
Thank
and I
you.
think the point then is that you're seeing it from a distance, but also with a bend and a trees above it.
But this view is from the A30, so in the context, are you saying that this height here will also be 15 metres?
Maximum height there would be 15 metres. As I said, it would be a matter for the reserved matters application and another opportunity for you to
respect that. I'm just talking, obviously, I respect that about parameters, but the parameters are also important in which the envelope you're seeking to have set. May I ask a second question of Mr. Barker? What consultation have you undertaken with residents, and can you be specific with us about the various items of consultation that you have actually undertaken? That would be most helpful. Thank you.
Yes, well, we've met with the residents of Ganderdown Cottages on several occasions now. We're obviously providing mitigation measures in regards to them as a receptor. It wouldn't be right for me at this time to go into the detail of those discussions in terms of where they currently are.
Is that all that you've done?
No, we also did, if I can just interject there as well, we also did a full online community engagement exercise over a 8-week period that included reaching out through a website and Facebook, and we had over 10,000 people filling our surveys on that piece across Basingstoke. That was prior to the submission of the planning applications. That also included, very much like we're on today, a series of YouTube consultation events where people could put Q&As in and we would answer them. Those Q&As were then all submitted on the website and updated on that website.
And did you do anything beyond just electronic communication to those people that wouldn't necessarily have access to or be aware of the ability to access such information?
In line with the, if you appreciate that this was completed in the height of the summer, so it was in line with all the COVID guidance. So we followed the COVID guidance lines from the government with regard to online engagement only.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate those answers.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a couple of questions, if I may. I'm not really sure who will pick these up, so I'll just get on with them. Can somebody answer me, given that we've got the cottages and the noise and the impact and the mitigation and that various things we've read about, why were we not looking at the access being a roundabout or something at the location for traffic lights at the northeast of the site, where of course it would have been a long way from houses, and it would have meant one roundabout, one junction, dual carriageway, and perhaps an exit lane much closer to the motorway. Was there a reason why that was not decided upon? That's my first question.
So we do have Matt Thomas, who's the transport consultant online. Matt, are you able to answer that directly? Right, if he's not online, then I will answer it on his behalf. As we work through the pre-applications with Hampshire County Council, we designed the scheme to be consistent with the original application that was deemed acceptable to Hampshire County Council in terms of the location of the roundabout into the hospital site. We worked along that, working with Hampshire County Council to deal with those matters. And the second point to make there is that in terms of the geometry and the levels, the location, Councillor Tomlin, that you're suggesting to, the geometry and the site levels would prohibit an access at the location I believe that you're referring to.
Okay, thank you very much. The other one was the question that was asked about the potential user, and it was brought up, I think, by the parish council, with queuing lorries and the potential. So can you tell me the capacity and why your statement says there will be no queuing lorries? How you can be so confident? Could you elaborate, please?
Of course. Can I refer you to the update report? We've made a full statement in the update report that I think the officer has included. I'm just looking for the exact page of it now. You can just bear with me. I can take you to page 15. A statement in there with regard to parking management, and the concern that was being raised is the suggestion that HGVs will park anywhere off site in inappropriate locations. The site's been specifically designed to allow for HGVs to be on site, either parked or within the loading bays that are there. And the access to the site in the rear has also been provided to have queuing areas for them. There's also a automatic transport management plan for the site, and that will ensure that actually there's no queuing vehicles outside, and that deliveries and HGV drivers have a very specific entry and access point within the site. So for all of those reasons, we are 100% confident that we can accommodate all of the HGVs within the parking management regime. And I trust that statement on page 15, or well, it says 15 and then says page 19 underneath it, addresses those points.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor McCormack, please.
So HGVs have been mentioned, but I just want to get some kind of figure, some kind of estimate of how many delivery van movements you anticipate per hour in a facility that's 4 million square feet. I mean, that's a very large number of square feet that's going to be occupied by goods that are going to be transported in by HGV and then transported on to other destinations by delivery vans. And just from my own personal experience, where I work at the moment is opposite an Amazon depot, and at certain times of day we get some serious problems with congestion with delivery vans queuing to get into the site. And I'm sure
Councillor McCormack,
Yeah.
I'm sorry to stop you, but we've been asking this question, and through officers, I asked at the briefing for a rate of vehicles that came out, and I was given a very good explanation of that. It was sent out in the update by the planning officer, Sue Tarvett, this afternoon or earlier on today, and I asked a similar question, and I would like to bring Sue Tarvett in on this because she has got the explanation that this is an HGV to HGV depot, and there's a way that this is controlled. And this is a question that we've had in the briefings of to this committee up until this point. Now, what I'd like to do is ask Sue Tarvett to come in on this. I ask the diligence of the applicant here, just to make it perfectly clear to the committee exactly where we stand on this business of HGV to HGV. So, Mike Townsend.
Chair, it was just in terms of, I suppose, a procedure. Clearly, we can come in at that point. I just wondered, Chair, whether the question should be at least answered by the applicant in the first instance because it's been posed, and then certainly we can come in and wrap up at the end when there's the opportunity to, Chair. But it may be the applicant has a particular view to state.
Yeah, it's just that assumptions, we have to, I've been trying to rush you, but I don't want assumptions to be brought in at the moment, thrown to the applicant. Let's ask the applicant. Let's keep to the question that you asked originally, Councillor McCormack, if we could. How many van movements do they anticipate? Because I think that may answer the question and make the distribution of HGVs stroke vans, it'll be put into perspective. I think that's the perspective. I think that's the right way to do it. Yes, Mike.
And Chair, I believe that it's possible, but I believe the transport consultant who wasn't able to access the meeting during the first part of the presentation may now be online. The agent may be able to confirm one way or other, but in responding to the question.
Yeah, thank you. And the other thing is, you mentioned the name of a possible distributor. This application is relative to the land and the space for a distribution warehouse. Whoever occupies it is not relevant to this planning application. But the movement of vehicles could be.
Craving the committee's indulgence, I was citing an example where you get patterns of vehicle movement. So you get accumulations of vans at certain times of day for delivery.
Right, let's go back to the transport member of the application team and get his input here, please.
Good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes,
Sorry, I've
they
been
can,
struggling with the link. Apologies for that. So thanks very much. First of all, I think just to reiterate, this isn't a last mile delivery operation whereby there are lots of van movements routinely across the day. This is a HGV to HGV warehouse, which is also largely automated. So whilst one of the councillors raised the point that it was quite a large building, there is significant automation within the building itself, probably about 60% based on other examples. We've undertaken a very thorough assessment of traffic generation, both HGV and cars and light goods vehicles over the course of the application, which has obviously been agreed with Hampshire County Council and also Highways England. And to give you an idea of the numbers of vehicles, we are talking about 290 movements, that's in and out combined, during both peak hours. So that's in a morning peak hour and an evening peak hour, of which about a half of those would be HGV movements, a little bit less, difficult to be specific in percentage terms, but that should give you a feel for the number of vehicle movements. These are obviously set out in our transport assessment as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
Is there anything else to follow up on that, Councillor McCormick?
I mean, it's more a question of trying to get an understanding of the sort of anticipated pattern. So we're mentioning peak movement, so that might imply employee movements at the start and end of the shift. But if it's a 24-hour operation, then there might be other peaks which wouldn't coincide with the AM peak elsewhere. But I just wanted to get an idea of, you know, when we've got a morning peak, how much extra traffic movement have we got, and how is that likely to impact, you know, on the surrounding area, bearing in mind it's a motorway junction that's used for other things as well.
Sorry, just to come back in. So yeah, I mean, traditionally we only assess the peak periods because that's when our highway networks, local and strategic, are theoretically at their busiest. And so the focus of our analysis and the subsequent work within the environmental statements are solely based on peak hour movements rather than off-peak movements where, you know, you might expect 50 to 60, even 70% less traffic on the local and strategic road networks. And importantly, those peak hour assessments show that with our proposed mitigation, that the traffic associated from the site can be readily accommodated on the network. And that's also forecast to 2030. So we're talking sort of almost 10 years into the future.
Okay, Councillor McCormick.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned earlier solar generation. Could you talk us through that a little bit? How much of the roof will be covered in solar panels, sort of percentage-wise? And would the whole site be a net contributor or a net user of power? That's my first question. I do have another one afterwards, if I could. Thank you.
Just to be clear, Councillor Robinson, the application before you is an outline application. So the level of detail in terms of the number of panels will be quantified when we get to each reserve matters planning application. But I think what we're saying is it's an important contributor towards the climate crisis, and we are working towards a BREEAM Excellent for those buildings.
Okay, thank you for that. And the second question is on the HGV parking, and you've made it quite clear that there will be sufficient parking within the site and they won't be queuing out on the road, which is great. what facilities will be available to those drivers when they are parked up waiting to get into a loading bay? Will there be toilet facilities available, cafe facilities available to them, and other things like that?
Again, I can only speak to you on that from the point of view of the next application, but of course, in a modern logistics distribution, all of those things are considered as part of the development. They will be on site.
Okay, so you would expect them to be there at this stage?
Yes.
Councillor George.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just address my question to Joe Davis, please? Very quickly, Joe, you did mention sustainability, and I think you just mentioned it again, that regarding the BREEAM, should we say, ambitions you have, I think, for this site. You did mention that you are aiming towards excellent rating. Can I just confirm that that will apply to all BREEAM aspects, not just the water quality for this for the development, please?
Absolutely. So we've got a framework, we've got a sustainability framework that the outline will require all buildings to work towards. And in determining the next application, we have obviously worked hard to ensure that that building can meet a BREEAM excellence. So we've already demonstrated with our first application, if you like, within the outline that the framework works.
Thank you.
Right, any more questions to the applicant? Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just clarify, seeing as we are talking about an outline application, is it the applicant's intention, may I ask, and forgive me, I don't know which of you would answer this, Matt, whether it be you that would take this. Are you saying that no matter the user that comes into any one of these facilities you seek to build, it will be HGV to HGV, and there will be no deviation from that, no matter which lessee comes in to take on the facility? And may I also ask, in terms of the 60% automation figure that was used, how can you then independently, and have you independently verified the 1,400 job figure that is associated with the outline application? And therefore, if it's not independently assessed and it's your own figure, how do you yourselves guarantee, and is there a guarantee, that there will be 1,400 jobs associated with this application as it's currently prepared and in front of us?
Okay, so the application before you is in outline, and the calculations used to work out the employment numbers are calculated on the floor space figures. You've got the maximum floor space figure we've got, which is why you've got a different figure for the outline and the full, because when we get to the full application later on this evening, we have a higher number because we can provide you with greater detail in terms of quantum of floor space and the likely jobs that are created by that space. In terms of the outline we have calculated the plot 1, which is the application you see before you, will absolutely be HGV to HGV. Then the transport assessment does have an element, a maximum floor space element of non-HGV to HGV, and that's calculated within the transport assessment.
Right, thank you very much. And we'll move on to the next speakers. And thank you very much for the applicants there. Could I ask Councillor Diane Taylor, please?
Sound check, sorry, can you hear me?
Loud and clear, Diane.
Thank you very much. Thanks,
and
everyone.
good evening to you. And
thank you.
You have 4 minutes.
Right, here I go at breakneck speed in that case. So that time constraint means I will pare my comments right down. I concur with all that's been brought so far by objectors. I think they've expressed themselves well. I'm going to comment on just 2 key reasons for refusal that's relevant to this particular outline application. First of all, landscape. This is something I do know a bit about, more than biodiversity. The whole area is popular with walkers. As you know, the Wayfarers Walk skirts around the northern edge of the site, and people frequently walk around this whole area. To the north of the A30 as well as to the south, of the motorway. In fact, I've just been there today, just this afternoon, to explore this whole area so I can speak with some authority. It would be in your face from the A30, this development. On this particular arm of the A30, it's currently quite a sedate road with 2 popular pubs, and there are many walks around there, especially around the area of Level Lane. The applicants, just listening to them, seem to only be able to suggest either a bund to the south and trees everywhere else to offset the damage to the landscape. People like to see fields and sky as well. The officer's report quite rightly states that the proposal will create a significant adverse landscape impact. And I totally agree. In fact, I would say it's almost indisputable, having looked at this site from various viewpoints, including Southwood Farm opposite it. Hannah and I both went there some time ago to look at it. It will absolutely dominate the rural landscape as proposed in this outline application. But I do want to progress beyond just landscape and ask you to incorporate in reasons for refusal the objection made by our urban design team, which states, and I quote, "The proposed scheme would represent an overdevelopment of the site by virtue of the siting, scale, massing and appearance of the warehouses, which would cause harm to the character of the area." And there are many policies listed backing this up. I haven't personally seen a map or plan submitted which actually highlights just how close this site is to Hounsdon Fields, the site for which there's approval for 750 residential homes. I might have missed it, but I haven't seen it. The end sections of these 2 sites are separated only by the A30. And the problem in assessing this one before we actually see the houses at Hounsdon Field is that we have to envisage what will be there. And we haven't really had, I don't think, any documentation to demonstrate this. Hounsdon Fields opposite will be the homes of some 2,000 or so local residents who want to live good and healthy lives and who will, if this is approved, be living in the wake of a vast warehouse complex with all the associated traffic, unsightly views and pollution that this will cause. If we're going to talk about the character of this area, which the policies do talk about, it's indisputably residential, both now and even more so when Hounsdon Field and the golf course with its 1,000 homes add to the already extensive areas of Beggarwood and Longacre. And
you have
let's
1 minute.
I'm going on. Yes, I'll be very good. And let's not forget, please, Ganderdown Cottages, right opposite. I went to see them today as well. They have a big banner outside saying no to the warehouses, so I don't think they've come to any conclusion yet. Honestly, if this was a proposal for just one house, with the impact that it would have on those cottages, we would throw it out instantly. How can we possibly say that this impact is acceptable if you look at that picture of it? This outline, just so we can get it in perspective, is for over 270,000 square metres of warehousing. That's more than 50 football pitches worth of impersonal utilitarian warehouse structures. They simply do not belong here amongst the homes of thousands of our residents. So please, before you decide, would you refer to NPPF section 12, which is just so key to all this. It talks about being sympathetic to the local character, including the surrounding built environment, to establish and maintain a sense of place, to create places to promote health and well-being and so on. So in conclusion, Chair, my request is that we add harm to the character of the area with its accompanying policy reasons, as cited by our own officers, to the recommended reasons for refusing this outline application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Taylor. Questions for the Ward Councillor? No? Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor.
Thank you.
Councillor Hannah Golding, please.
Good evening, Chair.
Good evening, Hannah, and you have 4 minutes.
Thank you. EP1 on page 111 of your report sets out tests for developments such as this, and I would argue that the proposal does not pass these tests. It is not able to successfully mitigate the landscape impact, as noted by the officers. Warehouses will be on full view in the entryway of Basingstoke from the M3, and it will also impair views from Dummer and North Northam. I would suggest that the hundreds of letters of objection would help reassure committee that it is not compatible with neighbouring uses either. This includes, but is not limited to, the residents of Ganderdown Cottages and those using the Wayfarers Walk. The test also requires that a development be able to successfully mitigate the impact of the development on the character of nearby settlements. Again, I refer to the numerous and passionate letters of objection, alongside the officers' notes of harming the Dummer heritage area because views of huge warehouses, funnily enough, do not fit in with the village landscape, and the damage to the countryside views from North Waltham as well. Neither is the application able to demonstrate there is proven need for the floor space it suggests. Indeed, this outline application seeks to over-provide space in a way that could damage our local economy instead of support it. I feel that the report misjudges the NPPF in this way by suggesting that significant weight should be placed on economic growth and productivity, because the dangers of an adverse effect are not considered or discussed. But no development exists in a vacuum. Over-providing warehouse space at Junction 7 is likely to see a decrease in use of existing facilities already in our town. Those facilities are often in the lowest car-owning areas in the borough, where people are currently able to walk to work. Moving warehousing to outside of the development boundary, where there is no public transport provision, will mean that people currently employed could lose their currently accessible jobs, thereby harming our local economy, in favour of employing more people outside of the borough who would travel in by car. I will take this moment to mention the MRT. I'm fully supportive of having an MRT in Basingstoke and enabling people to reduce their car use in favour of a frequent and rapid public transport service. But we have to face reality here. Regardless of any money put aside with this application, there will be no MRT without a new hospital nearby. And the danger of this current application is that it could harm the financial viability of a hospital on that site by taking up all of the available flux in the current road system, both locally and on Junction 7, which would require expensive improvements to be funded by the taxpayer. Now, we're not here tonight to discuss the rights or wrongs of a hospital at Junction 7, but I would ask that the committee put some serious thought into whether transport assessments proposed, which are largely contingent on an MRT in the future, are going to be valid if the hospital does not come forward, or if instead they may provide a far more harmful, significant impact on local traffic, our existing village communities, and the already approved developments at Hanson Fields and the Golf Club.
You have 1 minute.
Thank you, Chair. In many ways, it's a shame that the EP1 test does not mention any environmental impact, but it is covered elsewhere in policy, and therefore I'm disappointed by the recent updates given to us. Not least because they have not given anyone sufficient time to fully consider them, but also because of a strange attitude that the developers seem to be pushing, that if we have small numbers of a protected species, such as skylarks, we should then do less to protect them. I would argue that the onus therefore is on us to do more, not just to protect them, but also to support the increase in their numbers. A development of that size proposed this evening would be so damaging to many wildlife species that currently live there, from the mature oaks to the skylarks, and I would ask that committee consider the weight of this and that it should be reinstated as a reason for refusal. In summary, therefore, I would suggest that in addition to the reasons officers have given for refusal, this application does not pass the tests laid out in EP1 of our local plan, nor does it meet our environmental responsibilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Members, questions for the ward councillor? Nope. Councillor McCormick.
Could you quantify the potential impact on a new hospital of this development?
Potentially not, if Councillor Miller wants me to stay factual, because I think the honest answer is we don't know yet, and therefore I think it's presumptuous to have this application before us, and I appreciate, Councillor Miller, that is an opinion. But the hospital have put a letter in asking you to be aware of lots of things. And that's because they are still very much in their decision-making process. They don't yet know what their preferred site is, but that is one of their preferred sites. And I think there is real danger of this actively harming the proposal for that site. Now, personally, I would like to see a facility somewhat built. You know, if I've got to sacrifice green fields, I'm more able to cope for it with something that would be an absolute community benefit rather than a group of very ugly warehouses.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And thank you. I'll move on now to Councillor Terry Reid, please.
Thank you, Chair. You can hear
Good
me.
Good evening to you, Terry, and you have 4 minutes.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, members. At the end of an exhaustive local plan process that involved comments from residents and councillors and a local plan inquiry headed by a neutral inspector, this site was placed outside the settlement policy boundary. What we're faced with today is that decision being reversed, and the only direct input that my residents can have is a shared forward minutes of this meeting. I think our local residents members would ask you to defend their rights to be heard and indeed to defend the democratic process. The applicants can pay for full-page adverts in the local paper, but the local residents have to rely on you members to make the right decisions. It seems to me a nonsense that the outline planning application can be recommended for refusal, but the first unit can be recommended for approval. And what will happen if you agree to that process starting? Next will come the second application, then the third, then the fourth. We've already heard from the developers that they have plans and potential takers for these further developments. Each on its own may be deemed too small to be refused, but in the end the developers get their full aspirations met, even though the outline application has not been granted. There's been plenty of criticism on the southwest of Basingstoke for the planning of this area being done one field at a time. The process that's been started here is potentially to do it one shed at a time, and that is a clever but unacceptable use of the planning process by the developers. And again, members, only you can defend the interests of residents here. Now, we've heard that Hampshire have asked for restrictions on the amount of traffic that can be released onto the A30 corridor, which is a sure sign that problems already exist. But perhaps I could remind members also that no proper coherent cumulative traffic assessment was done on the impact of the residential developments of the golf course and Hounsdon Fields. To that now you're being asked to add the extra load of the first house and then potentially many more. There must come a point surely where we say this will not be all right on the night. We have to plan areas like this in their entirety and not one field or one building at a time. And with the greatest respect to the applicants, I have to say that in my opinion, it was disingenuous to suggest that somehow minor improvements to a roundabout will therefore assist somehow with the development of hospital, when the hospital will be competing for road space with a massive increase in HGV movements, as we heard, which hasn't even been properly quantified. And when the applicants were talking about the green credentials for the site, again, with the greatest respect to them, I feel it also is disingenuous to suggest that somehow it is green and it is in keeping with the climate emergency that members we have all voted for and are all keen to see that we improve our green credentials as a council. Because how can this huge increase in lorry movement somehow be carbon neutral?
You have 1 minute.
Thank you, Chair. You don't have to pass this today, members. The field is outside the settlement policy boundary. By turning down both applications, you can buy yourselves time to plan this area properly, to make informed decisions and to take into account the potential for a new hospital here. This will serve Basingstoke and certainly the residents of Southwest Basingstoke far better than the piecemeal approach into which you appear to be being pushed this evening. Thank you, members.
Thank you very much, Councillor Reid. We have any questions for Councillor Reid this evening? No, thank you very much. Right, we're going to move into questions to officers. Now, it's we had a briefing beginning of last week where members of the committee had the chance to address questions to officers in preparation for these particular applications, and the planning officer Sue Tarbutt distributed today, just before noon, a summary of the questions that we asked her to provide some answers to, and I hope the committee has had a chance to look at those. And also, obviously it's fairly short notice, but a fairly comprehensive update paper as well. Now, as questions to officers, I'm going to kick off with one because it's a subject raised by a couple of the speakers today. I'd just like a confirmation from officers, please, that the references to the settlement policy boundary, we all know how it affects residential applications. Is it still applicable in this case? And is the state, or are the statements made that this is outside the settlement policy boundary relevant?
Chair, perhaps if I could answer that one. So
please do.
The fact that the application site is outside settlement policy boundary is a material consideration before you. It's in effectively a countryside location, but the key issue is that the policy EP1 does allow for a site to come forward ahead of a development plan document for allocating a site for this type of use, and places no restriction on where that may be. It's policy EP1, as you'll see in the report, was brought about because effectively during the local plan period, there was it was accepted that there wouldn't be the ability to accommodate the need for this type of development within existing employment areas, and therefore it allowed the criteria-based EP1 policy that you now have before you. So in essence, it can come forward for a site outside the settlement policy boundary.
Thank you very much for that explanation. Right, questions to officers. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. I've got one for our officers and then one, if I may, for the chap from Hampshire County Council Highways. Firstly, the tree TPO and our comments on the update paper from the tree preservation order. Could the officers clarify these trees are not considered to be under immediate threat? They're either going to go or they're not going to go. And I understand if it's outlined, they won't be going until it's got reserved matters. But suffice to say, if they're destined to go or not, can you just clarify that statement, please?
Thank you, Chair. The tree preservation, the tree officer was asked to consider a TPO order, but until the application is determined, he considers that at the moment the trees are not at threat. If permission is granted for either this application or both applications, then the permission would override any TPO order. So at present, there is no threat to the trees. That's the advice from the tree officer. Okay, all right, thank you. And then, Chair, if I may speak to, is it Mr. Wilcox from HCC?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, the question I've got is in the comments in our report paper, the officer's report, there's a concern expressed by the County Council on the low noise surfacing durability, because I see they're seeking for a sum of £260,000 to maintain this for 60 years, and it implies every 6 years we're going to have to resurface the road. Is this because we've got accelerating HGV lorries coming out the roundabout, digging trenches in the soft tarmac as we see on motorways, or any other reason? And is 6 years fair? Will it not, with this volume of traffic, be working a lot harder for its life, given we see these anti-skid surfaces breaking up with regular monotony across the county as surface treatment? So could you just elaborate, please, on that surface? Thank you.
Oh, hi there, good evening. Thank you for the question. This is a matter that's been dealt with by our sort of on-site teams that look at sort of the maintenance of the roads. So I'm no expert in this. However, from my discussions with them, it's the standard road surface, HRA, hot rolled asphalt, lasts far, far longer than the low noise surface. So it's nothing to do with the quantum of traffic on there. It's just the surface itself has a shorter life than the standard HRA that we'd have elsewhere in the county. And on that basis, it's a higher commuted sum that's been determined for over the 60-year period. But you are correct. It will be maintained on a much more frequent basis than a standard road surface would.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. My question relates to the bund. Now there is a bund in application in the outline application. There's no bund, I don't think, in the full application. Could the officers please explain to me why there is in one and not in the other?
Thank you. The bund that's proposed as part of the outline is because you're looking at the development of the whole of the site with buildings through zones 1, 2 and 3 potentially. The full application, which you'll consider later on, is only looking at the proposal for on the top zone 1, and basically that you wouldn't be able to see from Dummer. The harm, well not the harm, the landscape impact is caused by the lower zone 3, zones 2 and 3, hence the reason for the bund. So on the full application, that area, which we'll look at later, is actually clear of buildings.
Okay, thank you for that. And I'll ask the same question when it comes to the full application then, because it looks as though that might be developed as a site beyond the zone 1. My other question refers to page 63. In the heavy type where it says recommendation, the council has been contacted by the planning casework unit. What exactly does that mean, please?
Thank you. So the planning casework unit, that's MCLG, they have been asked to call in the decision, the application, and they basically, the way the process works, they will allow the decision process at a local level to carry on. So we're here to make a decision tonight, and then we notify them of what the recommendation and the decision tonight was, and then they will take a view as to whether the application should be called in for consideration, or whether they are happy for us to carry on at the local level to issue the decision that you come to tonight.
That bit I understood, but I'm just wondering who asked them to call it in then?
I understand that the call-in request has come from local MPs.
Okay, thank you for that.
Any more questions to officers? Councillor George.
Thank you, Chair. Just one point regarding, if you look at the strategic flood risk assessments and things like that, there is a known area of flooding right close to the entrance to the site, actually. Have we looked at that in any detail to see whether, if that flooding was to occur, would it disrupt the operations of the site? How severe is it, and what measures? Because I can see no proposals for actually trying to resolve that particular problem.
Chair, could I just ask a point of clarification? Do you mean specifically at the point of the HGV access, sorry, Councillor George, or the roundabout access?
Thank you, Mike. The issue is fundamentally, if you look at the location of the known flooding of the A30, it is actually between the current signal junction and the new site entrance. That's the area of the flooding. It's a known area. It's just identified on the strategic flood maps. I'm just wondering, that could clearly cause problems with disruption on the site. I just wondered what we looked at on that.
Yeah, I can't comment, Councillor George, whether statutory consultees have specifically looked at that point, but you'll see in the report and the order papers in terms of Appendix A of the conditions as to how these matters can be dealt with. Effectively, the application has been supported by a flood risk assessment that's been consulted on with the Environment Agency in the normal way, along with the lead local flood authority, and they have effectively confirmed no objections to the application subject to conditions. In addition to that, you'll note that there are a number of conditions related both to surface water drainage requirements. Bearing in mind it's an outline application clearly, so we don't have a detailed scheme at this stage in terms of how the site would be laid out, as well as ways in which the surface water drainage needs to be managed so that it doesn't impact on the highway network directly beyond just the site itself.
Thank you. I understand that, but I think it's a road issue rather than site issue. But we'll leave it at that.
Councillor Robinson, and Councillor Robinson, can I ask you to tilt your camera so we can actually see you?
Is that better?
No, not well, ish.
Okay, I'll work on that. Thank you, Chair. Very quick question. There's been these oak trees that are under threat have been mentioned. Could you tell us which zone they are in? Are they in zone 1, 2, or 3?
They run through the site, so you've got oak trees as you go through on the existing entrance into the site at the moment, but there are also some in field boundaries that would also come out, which would also be removed, but the peripheral trees around the site would be retained, and additional planting is also proposed.
Okay, thank you.
Right, no more questions, officers. Then we move into debate. I'll ask who'd like to, Councillor McCormick. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate the information that's come through at 11:55 this morning. Working full time, I've not had that much time to digest that today. I take the numbers projected with a little bit of a pinch of salt, to be honest, in this outline application. But I think we've heard today a really massive volume of objections from residents, local councillors, genuine concerns about the principle of this development. And I note also that it's recommended in outline, at least, for refusal. I'm minded to move that recommendation, but I'm just, before I do that, I'm just a little bit confused as to where that would leave us if we are approving or recommended to approve the detail application, because clearly for this scheme to go ahead, both would need approval. And there's also the unknown quantity referring up to the MCLG. But, you know, be that as it may, I think there's a very weighty preponderance of evidence that stacks against the outline application in any case. So, you know, I will be moving the recommendation.
Right, I'm going to go back to officers because we covered this in the briefing specifically about outline and full. So without compromising anything about moving motions and everything else, I'm going to ask Mike to run through this one again. This was the whole point of the briefing last week. And obviously there is some doubt about what was pushed across. So Mike, could I ask you to run through it once more, please?
Thank you, Chair. I think the main message, I suppose, is that simply each application has to be considered on its own basis. So this is an outline application. It's for a very similar site, clearly, although this outline application has the bund across the other side of the road as well. But this application clearly has more built development than the application that you're considering later. But this application does need to be considered on its merits. And effectively, that is why I know in speaking earlier on, there was a point made about confusion as to why there's two separate recommendations. Is because they are two separate applications, albeit that one could fulfill part of the other. There are two separate applications that do need to be considered separately because they have been submitted separately. So it is effectively the totality of the development proposed by the outline application that you are considering in item 1, and effectively the committee just needs to deliberate and come to a decision on that application on its own merits. Beyond that, Chair, I know the issue about the casework unit, but I think that is for another point. I think that is effectively it's still the committee needs to come to their own view locally first before any further decision would be taken by others elsewhere.
Thank you very much, Mike. Okay, Councillor McCormick.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm going to move the recommendation because I think the preponderance of evidence presented to us tonight suggests that that's the right decision.
I'll come back to that in a minute. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Well, just adding to the debate. So I've had some answers from officers and the applicant, and obviously we're talking here. Now we have the new figures. We have this application suggesting 30 HGV movements per hour during the night from the figures of 241 in the period from 11 o'clock till 7 in the morning. So that's approximately, in my calculation, 30 an hour. So every 2 minutes, we'll have an HGV accelerating out of that roundabout across this very precious road surface that won't last very long, and past those cottages. Now, the cottages mitigation for sound and noise is a large fence which goes above their existing hedge, facing south. We'll cut the light to the hedge, and I'm sure the hedge will suffer. And also, this surface seems absolutely, well, it's a sad situation that not only have they got noise and pollution, but every 6 years or less, I would suggest, they're going to have their road dug up and resurfaced. So I think we've got an issue here of noise and pollution that can't be mitigated. The low frequency of accelerating HGVs and the fact that they're certainly for the foreseeable future running on diesel, and they won't be electric with overhead pantographs as we might one day expect, that I think policy EM12 is severely compromised, and I would say that ought to be something that's added into reasons for potentially refusal. So I'm with that, and the sheer impact on the countryside, I'm quite happy to second this motion for follow the officer's report for refusal, but I would add, I suggest EM12 as another reason. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Tomlin. Any more speakers? I ask for this because we haven't had much of a debate on this particular topic as such. Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to go along with the proposer and the seconder on this, but I do think there are other things that need to be thought of in terms of the debate. I believe that it is overdevelopment of the site, and it has an effect on the countryside, and I fully take on board the contributions of the objectors. On the other hand, I do think that the proposal as it is does have some good sides to it, in that the efforts that have been made in terms of the talk about the grey water harvesting, the solar panels to reduce the energy use on the site, the fact that there will be this roundabout which could have a beneficial effect on any hospital proposal, and I think those elements of the application do need to be taken into account. But in this, and I think that's going to become more to the fore maybe in the next application that we look at. At the moment, I am minded to go along with the refusal, but I do think we have a duty to the applicants to look at the other elements of this application.
Thank you very much. Any more comments towards debate? Right, I'll go back to Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm trying to think of something positive on this, and the employment it provides is significant. If you'd asked me this question 18 months ago, I would have said it's not significant, because 18 months ago, I think the unemployment rate in Basingstoke was something like 120 people, which allowed for people who are actually between jobs or for whatever reason at that point in their lives choosing not to work. 120 is an incredibly low figure, but we have lost or are losing 2 major retailers in the borough, definitely, probably more to follow. So our unemployment rate is going to go up. This provides jobs, and it provides jobs right across the spectrum. So from an employment point of view, it's good. One of the objections I've seen written many times to this is it spoils the view as you come into Basingstoke on the M3. Well, I don't think the M3 was actually provided for people to enjoy the view as they come into Basingstoke. Hopefully they're not admiring the scenery. Hopefully they're concentrating on what's going on in front of them. So, but there are a lot of things that are wrong with it. I mean, the effect on Ganderdown cottages is obviously horrendous. And there are traffic considerations there, and the effect of the whole site on the countryside is dramatic. The other application is the full application is a different kettle of fish, because that's a full application effectively for half the site. That's a different matter. I think, like Councillor Bound, I can see some good, but I can see a lot of bad. I would actually like to listen to some more debate if anybody has anybody, because right now, I don't know exactly which way I'm likely to vote. Thank you.
Councillor George, followed by Councillor Potter, followed by Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'd like to reinforce that. I think the way things are going with retail and what have you, people are doing far more shopping online, and despite the need arguments on this, and we don't seem to have quite got there on that. I think there clearly is going to be a movement of shops of jobs towards online retail and things like that, which I think this development is there to meet those requirements. So I think that's a very positive. The only thing for me is the sheer scale of this is huge, and it is very, very large indeed. It's one of the largest sites, I believe, in the country being proposed here, and with this outline planning permission, we are talking about a very, very large development indeed, and and the impact both visually on landscape and on some of our heritage assets and all the other things I think is probably a step too far for that, certainly for this particular area. I think it's a step too far. So I think I'm very much in favour of going with the recommendation here.
Thank you, Councillor George. Councillor Potter.
Thank you, Chair. I should support refusal. I think that the officer's report is well made. I think we were told at the beginning that we probably are left with reasons for refusal 1 and 4 primarily, albeit we can add obviously to 1 in the way that colleagues are suggesting in terms of EM12, but clearly the significant, I think, detriment that would occur to the character and visual amenity of the landscape really cannot be ignored in these circumstances. This development doesn't belong here, that's for sure. And to be frank, I think there are better places in Basingstoke where it could occur, but that's not our role tonight. But I can think of many areas where it would be better suited without some of the problems that we've alluded to this evening. That isn't, as I say, within our brief to do that, really. What I do say, I think particularly, I mean, I don't mean to be pompous in any way, really. I mean, we're all attracted by the prospect of 1,400 new jobs in these very critical times. I don't know what the sound foundation of that is anyway, really. And I imagine we can guess at the type of jobs they may be in any case, really. Tempting though that is, the impact on the community for such development in this place would override that in my view, and I think this application should be rejected.
Fine, thank you very much. Councillor Harvey.
I just think it's incredibly disappointing that this application has come forward in this location. I think the context of the jobs on offer, as others have just said, in the sense that the need exists in Basingstoke because of COVID, because of what we've gone through, that we do need to see with investment, and we do need to see economic growth that brings jobs to our town that people can have and enjoy, and they need. And I think that's really important. And because of the location that this proposal is set in, there are a whole host of complications that others have said this evening that relate to landscape and relate to visual impact. And it is a really difficult choice. Which side of that fence do you come down on? Do you take the jobs despite the context in which the planning application is set? Or do you stay with the policy and stay with the view that landscape matters to us in Basingstoke, and this parcel of land is important in that context, outside of the settlement policy boundary, even given EP1's permissive element to it? So I say at the moment, I think the weight comes down on the landscape arguments, but I struggle with that on the basis of I would love to see these jobs in other places, because there are other places in Basingstoke where such developments could come forward on vacant sites, on brownfield sites that would do well for people in Basingstoke to have the jobs. We can't talk about that this evening. It's on the merits of the application in front of us. The developer has chosen to come forward with this site in this location. Therefore, it's this location we assess. And on landscape grounds, I'm struggling with it. I really am. So I think at the moment I'm minded to support the application. Support the motion, sorry, not the application, support the motion. That's
well, the officer's recommendation. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Nobody else? Right, Councillor McCormack. Sorry, Mike Townsend.
Thank you, Chair. And I just want to, I suppose, provide advice. I appreciate you're going to go back to Councillor McCormack as the original motion was put forward in that sense, but it was just, I suppose, to provide hopefully some assistance to the committee, because in essence the debate that the committee is having is exactly that issue, that all matters need to be balanced within the overall decision. And I think that's why the report has been set out in the way that it has, and in particular the attention that we drew to the planning balance on pages 182 through to 183 in terms of recognising both the positives and negatives, if you like, of the entire development. So that's the economic benefits, the jobs, etc. And it's only when you go through that process, as the committee is doing now, that you then clarify, I suppose, the issues that still are justifiable reasons for refusal. And I think that's the basis upon which the landscape reason for refusal in the recommendation, and I appreciate is being supported in the motion from Councillor McCormack, is considered to still be significant enough to warrant refusal of the application. If I could just speak briefly to Councillor Tomlin's suggested additions, Chair, if that's okay.
Please do.
I suppose it was just following on from that point. I appreciate that there will always be concerns around impact from development, and I think the report recognises that clearly there will be impacts on the residents of Gandown cottages. But I think the other part of the planning system, and you'll be aware from the National Planning Policy Framework, requires us to consider whether there are conditions, mitigation, etc., that can mitigate the impact of that to an acceptable level. And I think the package of mitigation has been put forward: the low noise road surface, the acoustic fencing, and other measures such as the arrangement of the buildings on site, etc., with other conditions. In terms of the recommendation, at least, was considered to, on balance, reach a stage where it wouldn't form a reason for refusal. So I suppose, provide the normal advice that I'd provide, which is that effectively reasons for refusal will be those that you consider are substantive, having done that planning balance, as opposed to necessarily just something which is of a particular concern. And I appreciate Councillor Tomlin was aware of that, because he mentioned the mitigation in his commentary. But I just needed to provide that advice, Chair.
Thank you, Mike. Right, Councillor McCormack, going back as the mover of the proposer. It's the recommendation of the officers with the reasons for refusal. Are you sticking with that, or are you minded to amend it in any way?
I think we'll stick with the officer reasons for now. I mean, I think that it's a very delicate balance with the M12 and some of the others, but I would feel safer, I think, with the officer recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor McCormick. Councillor Tomlin.
Well, in the interest of moving on, I'll settle for that, but I have to say I think the mitigation is poor, and in my opinion, and you know, when having spoken to that applicant about why they could not have looked at a entry point that would have moved the roundabout or whatever to a place where it wouldn't have harmed anybody, they probably could have got a different view from me. That would have been there. So I'll take officers' advice if they don't think it stands up. I just think it's not a sustainable mitigation, you know, so I'll just have to stick with my opinion. Thank you.
Fine. Thank you very much. Been properly moved and seconded on the officer's recommendation for refusal of the outline application. I'll take the roll call. I'll start. Councillor Leeks.
For the motion.
This is for the officer's recommendation for refusal.
Yeah.
Councillor Goodison.
Against.
Councillor George.
For the officer's recommendation.
Councillor Grant.
For the officer's recommendation.
Councillor Frankham.
For.
Councillor Robinson.
For.
Councillor Harvey.
For.
Councillor McCormick.
For.
Councillor Bound.
For.
Councillor Potter.
For.
Councillor Tomlin.
For.
Bernie.
It's 10 for the recommendation, 1 against.
Thank you. Officers.
Thank you, Chair. If I just reiterate that the application is refused in accordance with the recommendation on page 13 of the update paper, and that's reason for refusal 1 and 2. And just to remind councillors that the decision now will be passed on to the planning case unit at MCLG, and we'll await their decision in terms of a call-in.
Fine. Thank you very much. Right. It's 8:15. I'm going to call a what do you want? 5 or 10 minutes? 10 minutes? 10-minute recess and report back here at 8:25 sharp. We'll all be able to have a coffee.
Ooh, 1 minute to go.
Right, we'll ask everybody to check in. There we come. Two more. Waiting for Councillor Tomlin, Councillor Frankham. Councillor Tomlin. And Councillor Front. Right, we're back on. And I would like now to call Mr. Wareham, Mr. Gill, and I'm aware that there are other people down for speaking. Yes, Mike.
Chair, so I believe it's Julian Jones first.
Oh, I beg your pardon. My apologies. You are absolutely right. Mr. Jones first. I've got a sea of names here.
Right.
If you could just hang on, Julian, and we'll get the officers to introduce this application.
Thank you, Chair. This is a full application at Oakdown Farm for the demolition of 3 dwellings, outbuildings and related structures. And it's for the erection of a storage distribution class B8 building with ancillary offices. The total floor area would be 217,954 square metres. The proposals also include the associated infrastructure works, including access, parking, landscape, site reprofiling, drainage and the diversion of the underground pipeline. If I can draw to your attention the update paper and the additional consultee responses that we've received, which are addressed in the update. We've had some slightly amended highways plans, which take away a previously proposed crossing on the A30, which has now been superseded by the Toucan crossing. The oil pipeline originally objected when we reconsulted with them on the amended location, the location for the Toucan crossing. They've now withdrawn that objection, subject to an informative. And if I can just draw your attention to page 21 of the update paper, where we go through, and the condition number 1 has been amended to refer to the new highway plans, or the amended highway plans, and then there's just various minor changes to conditions 12, 13, condition 15 with regards to the archaeological officer, conditions 22 and 23 with regards to contaminated land, and also condition 25, and there's a typo in terms of condition 41. So the officer's recommendation is for approval.
Thank you very much. Mr. Jones, you have 4 minutes.
Okay, so I'll expand on some of the local policies. The local plan policy EP4, the biodiversity and nature conservation, that requires that there'd be no loss or deterioration of key habitats. There'd be no harm to the integrity of linkages between designated sites and key habitats. This site's known as Oak Down Farm, but this development will destroy more than 70 oak trees that are at least 80 years old, and in several cases considerably older. New planting will not mitigate the loss for at least a century. The applicant's proposal submitted on 30th of March cannot mitigate the disruption of habitat for birds, bats, invertebrates, flora and fauna found beneath the trees, and linkage between the sites of importance for nature conservation sinks to the north and south of the site. If we look at policy EP1, the economic growth and investment, again, this site fails to, on several criteria. It isn't able to mitigate the landscape impact, and there's insufficient space for soft landscaping. It isn't compatible with the neighbouring uses and the residential properties on Hounslow Fields. It cannot mitigate its impact on the character of North Waltham and Dummers conservation areas and its wider value to Basingstoke residents. The application hasn't demonstrated that there is proven need for the floor space. We're going to see it's a huge, more than doubling of the requirement in the local plan. The site's close to the strategic road network, but not related to it. It's limited by the constraints on the Southwood Junction, the Junction 7, and the substandard weaving distances between Junction 7 and 8. It's accepted by all parties that B8 parcels could not be supported by this site. There'll be insufficient remaining capacity to support development on South Manydown. Access to homes on South Manydown was anticipated in the plans for Hounslow Fields Spine Road. It'd be foolish to introduce a new obstacle to the development now. Where else will the next local plan find sites for 5,000 homes? The applicant's transport plan has a requirement for walking and cycling. The Toucan crossing's been proposed at Trenchard Lane. It appears the pipeline objection's been removed, but the officer's report confirms more work is required, and Hampshire have also conceded that they haven't found mitigation that would actually reduce the 85th percentile traffic speed across this crossing to 50 miles an hour. Is it wise to locate a Toucan crossing on such a location? Users of Wayfarers Walk will have to cross the warehouse HGV traffic twice, both at the Southwood lights and at the entrance to the site. There's no light control protection for the crossing over the HGV entry filter lane.
You have 1 minute.
The proposal is unsafe for pedestrians and cyclists, and the visual impact to the views along the Wayfarers Way will be destroyed for several miles. Development sources have stated there'll be in excess of 1,000 houses which be created. This cannot be guaranteed, and the automated warehouse is likely to reduce the jobs as robotics and AI advance. The NPPF section 180 also raises various issues on the quality of life and health for residents in the nearby area. this development will have a severe impact on the local area and the parish and village of Dummer. And finally, as has been pointed out earlier, it's in the test catchment. Part of the site's a flood area. The car park area will have hard surfacing, increasing the flood chances that we identified earlier. There's potential for local flooding along the A330 and pollution of the test and ultimately the SSI adjacent to Southampton water. I urge you to refuse this application.
Thank you very much, Julian. Could I ask this? Somebody's got an open mic and it's causing quite a bit of interference. Could you make sure all you're on mute, please? Right. If we could lose the... That's it. Thank you very much. And questions to the parish councillor? No questions. Thank you very much indeed, John.
Thanks, Chairman.
Julian. Right. I've got Mr. Wareham, Mr. Gill, and there's others mentioned, but I believe you're the speakers on this application this evening.
Correct. This is Mr. Wareham. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Right. Mr. Gill is going to speak first.
Okay, between you have 4 minutes.
Thank you.
I'm going to restart the clock.
Is Mr. Gill?
He's there, but he's muted. Mr. Gill, if you could unmute and start your presentation, please. Mr. Gill. We have no Mr. Gill. I see his name on the screen. His microphone is unmuted, but there's nothing coming through. Mr. Wareham.
Okay.
Can you take this up and start your presentation? I can't wait very much longer.
Okay, I'll start.
Right, you have 4 minutes starting now.
Okay. Many of you have already mentioned the issue of jobs and the problems Basingstoke faces in terms of the effects of COVID, etc. All of which, of course, is quite valid and does show a need to create jobs. However, we maintain that this is not the right place to put those jobs and not the right kind of business to do it. The first reason is that warehousing and distribution is currently going through a massive period of re-engineering in terms of robotics, AI as well, and this will affect the levels of jobs created considerably. It would be surprising if the numbers which you've been given, which are based on current usage, do not reduce by at least 50% over the next 5 years for the same levels of output. The second reason it won't help you in your current crisis is that it will come too late. This building is going to take of the order of 2 years to build. The Office of Budget Responsibility has estimated that the economy will return to 2019 levels by the end of 2022. So the only people who are going to gain in terms of short-term jobs is going to be the construction industry, who actually do not have a problem at the moment. And finally, can I address the issue of longer-term jobs? The council has described this as a large, unattractive building. We know that it will draw in hundreds of lorries blocking the roads. And yet we are talking in your vision statement of trying to attract people in high-tech jobs who will require access to scarce resources. Those kinds of people will not be attracted into an ugly area with very poor transport. And I urge you not to approve this proposition. Thank you.
Thank you. Is Mr. Gill there? Obviously, he's having technical difficulties. That's your presentation finished, is it?
Yes, indeed.
Mr. Ware?
Yes, indeed.
Right. I'll stop it there and I will ask members any questions to the speakers. Nope. Thank you very much. I move on to Ms. Davis, Mr. Barker, and I believe you're speaking and you have a couple of your colleagues with you.
Thank you, councillors, for listening to me for a second time. I'm sorry you felt you could not support our outline application, but I hope you can support this full application. The news of John Lewis closing its Basingstoke branch would have been a real blow for those workers, adding to a significant list of retailers whose staff have already been made redundant. However, I think our proposals can help turn bad news for those families into good news. The skills learnt in those retail jobs are directly transferable to logistics. We've already had lots of inquiries about job opportunities, including from those affected by recent redundancy. Our scheme would create a wide range of 1,300 guaranteed jobs within the next 18 months. As well as packing, driving and stock handling, there would be high-skilled roles, including mechanical and electrical engineering, software programming, logistics planning, finance, sales and marketing. We will also need hundreds of construction workers to build the new facilities and road junctions from as early as this summer. To ensure local people have the right skills for all these jobs, we have partnered with Basingstoke College of Technology, who will help train local people. As the college's principal, Anthony Bravo, said, this new development presents a fantastic opportunity for the Basingstoke community, with thousands of different jobs created at a difficult time in the jobs market. At a time of economic uncertainty, we want to play our part in Basingstoke's growth and future prosperity. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Good evening again, councillors. And thank you again for letting me speak. In determining the full application, I ask you to consider three things. The first is your local plan policy, EP1, which clearly states that you as an authority do not have sufficient land for logistics use. And this policy was put in place by the planning inspector to allow you to accommodate B8 provision and to allow you to ensure that you can accommodate investment into your borough. Secondly, it's very important on that point to also recognise that your council's evidence to that local plan and the evidence to inform this application confirms that you as officers professionally believe that Oakdown Farm is a suitable site for those uses. My second point for you this evening is with regard to HGV vehicles. As I said before, Highways England and Hampshire County Council have no objections to this full application. We've already touched on the operational issues with the HGVs on this site, and again, there are no objections. So therefore, we are confident that the logistics company which would occupy this site is extremely experienced in the effective management of goods and services and vehicles. Secondly, a point which hasn't been addressed as part today yet, about sustainability. As I mentioned, all the buildings would be high energy efficient BREEAM rating, but I can reassure you now that detailed BREEAM assessments have been done on this building and it will meet a BREEAM excellent rating, which will—
You have 1 minute.
which will contribute to your climate crisis emergency commitments. There will be renewable energies generated on site, and the fact that the entire roof would be future-proofed to allow additional solar access on the whole roof space, plus electrical vehicles charging, and we're committed to investing 1.4 million into the public transport. From day one, this building will generate on site 15% of its own power through new renewable energies. Finally, I have to make you understand the importance of the jobs and the investment of £74 million to boost the local economy. The NPPF requires the councils to look for sustainable inward investment, and I cannot underestimate the importance of jobs. For these reasons, I'd encourage you to support the officer's recommendation that shows no reasons for refusing this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to ask Councillor Robinson to kick off questions.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two questions. Firstly, how long from, if you were going planning permission tonight, how long will it take before this warehouse is operational?
I can answer that one, Mr. Robinson, Councillor Robinson. It would be the back end of summer next year.
Okay, so we're nominally sort of 18 months-ish.
Yeah, 14 to 16 months, yeah.
Okay, thank you. The second one of the previous speakers mentioned possible 50% reduction in the number of jobs as artificial intelligence comes in and obviously takes over things. Could you just comment on that? What your opinion, how you see that that reduction in jobs going forwards?
Well, I think there's no doubt that technology is playing a big part in logistics. But with that is coming the change and the shift to more high-skilled jobs being appropriate and required to operate these facilities. I referenced in my little presentation just there the types of jobs in terms of skilled mechanical, electrical engineering, software programming, and logistics planning. These are all high-skilled jobs that are absolutely critical to the efficient operational running of these facilities.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry, Councillor, could I just add to that? The 1,300 jobs proposed, direct jobs, not indirect, direct jobs for this building are based on the occupier's information. So I think that's really important. This isn't a calculation, this is based on occupier's experience.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Ballard.
Thank you, Chair. I believe that you've got a sustainable travel plan. Could
Yes,
you briefly run that through the committee, please?
Can I check if Matt Thomas is on the line again? If not, I will.
Yes, I'm here, Joe, if everyone can hear me.
Yes, you're loud and clear, Matt.
So, yes, we do have a sustainable travel plan. And as it's been alluded to, this equates to about £1.4 million worth of investment. The majority of that, 1.2 million, will be in a brand new demand responsive bus service for the site, which is significant because it's new to the area, and also it will benefit the wider residential areas of Basingstoke and not just the site. And then in addition, the rest of the funding will be used for a significant travel plan itself for members of staff and public visiting the site to help them travel more sustainably. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I have a second question, Chair?
Oh yeah, go right ahead.
My second question was, I believe that there is no bund with this proposal. The unit that is going to be built, is it being built on the same footprint as Unit 1 on the refused application? And if so, why is there no bund in terms of DUMA?
So if I can start, there's two reasons for that. The first, you're correct. Sorry, Councillor Ben, you're correct. The proposed full application is on the same plot as plot 1 of the outline application. The reason that there is no bund required is that visually there is no impact from Dummer of this building because of the topography of the site. Any material that we are moving, we're moving within plot 2 and 3 of the site on the outline. So the material stays within the site.
And the building will still be 15 metres high, is that right?
John, do you want to just pick up on this?
Yeah, no, the maximum, the height of the building on plot 1 is 25.3 meters, but because the site plot 1 sits down, you will therefore not be able to see it from Dummer.
Okay.
Any more questions to the applicant? Sorry, Councillor Tomlin, yes.
Thank you, Chair. Right, the potential user of this site, who we won't be discussing who it is, but you seem to refer to them having done their various figures and supplied you, so they obviously exist. They have a television advert running currently which says they are a zero carbon company. They're doing their fleet of electric vans, etc. So with you only doing 15% of generation of the energy consumed by the factory, given the fact that it's highly automated, seems a missed opportunity here for such a company. And I wonder what you would plan to do for them to address this issue, should they actually become your actual tenant. What could you do and what will you do?
For me, the proposition before you is a building. The building and the design of that building and the approach that we've taken to that building will deliver you on day one a building which is a BREEAM excellent rated building. That is the requirement and the test of the planning process, and it is the building that we're talking about here. So I think for the purposes of considering this application, the building from day one can be powered with 15% renewables on site, and the BREEAM assessment will be excellent, which again is one of the very few distribution buildings in the country of that rating.
If I may, Chair, so for the next 60 years, then we will see it slowly become outdated. Is that how I understand it?
No, as I explained, that the building's roof has the opportunity to increase the level of solar paneling during its lifetime, as will the infrastructure within the car parking and the site area will be ready for further electric vehicles in the future. So we're future-proofing the site and the buildings.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor McCormack. Sorry, Councillor McCormack, hang on. Councillor George first, then Councillor McCormack.
Thank you, Chair. Look, thank you. I know all the travel assessments and what have you are based upon HGV to HGV. You know, purpose for this particular site. And you know, if you look at all your parking, it's basically either cars or it's HGVs. But you know, there are a number of bays on the development there for delivery vans, LGVs, and what have you. You know, can I ask, you know, where are they going to park on the site? Are they going to use the HGV bays or what? Where are they going to go? Is there any provision made for that? And you know, what sort of numbers of LGV movements would there be associated with those bays, please?
Thank you, Councillor. That's a very good question. Could I come back to you? I just need to actually find the number of van spaces in our document. The reason I say that is that the site hasn't really been accommodated for vans. It's HGV and staff car parking. So can you bear with me a few moments and I'll come back to you with the answer? Is that okay?
Thank you.
Is that the only question you've got, Councillor George?
Yes, that's the only question. So please go on to another one, and I'm sure
Right, Councillor
Matt
McCormack.
Thomas will come back to me. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Has any consideration been given to any forms of wind energy on that site, given that it's at an elevation of 144 metres, which is actually quite high, and we have considered that area for having a wind farm in close proximity to Junction 8 before now, one of the reasons being its height and the high amount of wind that was there.
Councillor McCormack, the answer to that is when we looked at the site in its first instance, we looked at all of the feasible renewable options for the site, and the strategy that we've come up with that gets us to a BREEAM Excellent excludes wind.
One more, if I may, Chair. Just not a bit more detail in terms of provision for pedestrian and cycle access. I mean, one of the things that we're looking at doing is having a cycle corridor up the A30 into town, and we've got approaching 2,000 houses in close proximity. So how many cycle bays have you got, and how much cycle path have you got in the vicinity of the site, and where does it stop?
If I may just jump in on that one, Councillor, it's Matt Thomas again. So our proposed Toucan crossing is situated in a location to tie into the Hounsome Fields development, which then links back, if you like, through to Basingstoke for walking and cycling. In terms of, I'm still looking for the van numbers, by the way, Councillor George, but they will be low because it's a HGV to HGV facility. But in terms of cycle parking, I want to say, and I'm just checking this again, that it's actually 230 cycle parking spaces, which is quite considerable, and is at, if not better than standard. And together with that, obviously, there will be showers in the building. There will be incentives as part of the travel plan to encourage people to walk and cycle to the site. And those may be financial incentives. The spaces are also located in a convenient part of the site, and they will also be covered.
Thank you.
So we're just waiting upon Councillor George's question to be answered.
The answer is I can't put my finger on the absolute number, but Councillor George, as I've said, the site is being designed in a way to accommodate HGV to HGV movements, because essentially that's the end use. But what we've also done, if you've seen the transport assessment, is we've undertaken quite a considerable parking accumulation assessment, which demonstrates that we have sufficient parking on the site. That was one of the points raised by the statutory consultees, Highways England and Hampshire County Council. So we've thoroughly explored car parking on the site.
Councillor George, can I just take you back to on page 15?
You just faded out, Joe.
Oh, sorry. Can I just take you back to the car parking management piece that we've included on the update sheet of page 19? And I think that reassures you that actually the process has HGV parking predominantly across the site, and there will be a management plan that will within the site post it with regard to any vans. I think just the final point I just wanted to add, to come back to Councillor McCormack, we also need to be very clear here that this proposal fundamentally exceeds your sustainability policies going forward, and seen as a very positive in delivering your goals in terms of getting to carbon zero. So it's a massive contributor towards your objectives for within the council, and it goes beyond your existing policy position in terms of sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Joe. Councillor Robinson. I'll come back to you, Councillor George.
Thank you, Chair. Could you tell me why this site is the question? There's land available in a place like Mickledever where you could connect directly into the railway network, and connecting directly into the railway network would obviate an awful lot of the objections. Can you tell me why a site like that hasn't been considered, or presuming it hasn't?
Joe, I can answer that one. I mean, this site is being brought forward because of its strategic location, adjacent to the motorway junction. It's also of a size and scale that can deliver the buildings that are currently required in the marketplace. I noted comments earlier in tonight's committee meeting regarding brownfield sites. The simple fact is there are no brownfield sites within the region that can accommodate buildings of this sort of size and scale, which is what the market demands at the moment. Also, there are a number of issues with some of the limited existing stock in terms of it not being suitable for modern day requirements. So that is why this site was selected, and that is why we have a queue of people that we're talking to who want to take space on this site. And they are a mix of national, regional, and a number of local occupiers who are looking to grow and expand within the Basingstoke area.
And can I just pick up and add one extra point to that? Your local plan inspector deemed your local plan sound on the basis that you included EP1 because you didn't have sufficient land allocated for distribution and B8 warehousing. That was on the grounds of soundness. Your technical advisors on this application have confirmed that this is an appropriate site for those uses and that there is a pent-up demand for B8 uses. So I think it's just really important to put into the context of what was considered when the local plan was considered and when the local plan was deemed sound.
Okay, if I may say, I appreciate that there's the lack of brownfield sites, and I appreciate what you said, but somewhere like Mickledever, we've talked about Mickledever Newtown for many years, so land is available there, and it is directly adjacent to a railway. And if you could take your goods in to a site like this directly on a rail link, I would have thought that would have had huge advantages, but it would appear from the conversation we've had that hasn't been considered. So I'm really interested why a direct rail link, a site immediately adjacent to a railway, hasn't been considered.
Councillor Robinson, just as you referred to in the outline application, the application before you is for a distribution centre at this site. My client owns this land and has brought forward the application on the basis of that, which is consistent with the evidence base that you put forward to your local plan, recognising that you didn't have sufficient land allocated for logistics. And this site was identified as suitable for that. That's been confirmed by your advisors advising on this application. So I appreciate what you're saying, but I don't think that we can answer that question.
Okay, thank you.
Right, Councillor George, I'd like to come back to you, try and help you out a bit. On page 296 of the main report, in paragraph 8.11.2, and this is identified by the officers, obviously in conjunction with the applicant, at the penultimate line, it's all to do with to control the parking base. There's the ratio of HGV loading bays to vans is 68:5. Maybe that might help you. That's the only one that I can find at the moment.
Okay, thank you for that, Chair. That's very, very helpful. But I suppose my issue here was that the fact that I suppose we're being asked to consider this site for B8 use with HGV to HGV transfer use being conditioned, and that's the thing here. And I'm just wondering, and that's if there's an issue of enforcement there, how do you enforce situation where possibly LGVs are going to be parking in HGV bays and vice versa? And how do we, because clearly if we go down more distribution routes, the traffic conditions are going to be very difficult. So the question is there dedicated light good vehicle bays, and can the HGV distribution points, or the I suppose the places where they back up to, could they be used for LGV loading as well?
Councillor George, maybe if I can assist here. The design of the building is absolutely bespoke for HGV to HGV. This is a fulfillment centre rather than a last mile, and I think that the 68 versus the 5 days demonstrates that commitment. And with the only way you could change that would be by fundamentally changing the building. That would be a planning application. So absolutely we need, it would be a new planning application. Absolutely we would need conditions if we were on the outline, but certainly not for the full application.
Okay, thank you.
Right, no more speakers to the applicant. Thank you very much. I'm going to move on now to Councillor Taylor, please.
Hello, I'm back again. Hello.
Good evening, Councillor Taylor. And
Okay.
once more, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you very much. So, reasons for refusal. You've heard many and you've asked some good questions. But the number one thing for me is this, and I'll say it again, this site is just not the right place for warehousing. We've already talked about the housing coming to the area that has permission and that will be situated so close to this utilitarian building. And this one is over 40 football pitches, so it's 80% of the size of the one you've just turned down. It's big, it's huge. I'll simply reiterate the comments by our landscape officers as far as refusal is concerned and the urban design team, and they've made these comments on this full application. The adverse impacts on landscape character and visual amenity and an overdevelopment of the site by virtue of siting scale, massing and appearance. And those for me are the 2 key reasons for turning this down. Oh, and of course, please don't forget the plight of Ganderdown cottages in your deliberations. Can we honestly treat people like this in our haste to get warehouses? But in conclusion, I just have to say this. I know that we're required to look at this application through the microscopes of the different categories, highways, landscape, etc. However, having done that, I'd just like to say, take a step back. When I was on DC, we often used to say, let's exercise a bit of common sense here. Take a step back and say, let's look at this as a whole and ask the question, is this what we really want for our town of Basingstoke for its future? Some people who've been given media space, or one person at least, wants this as our legacy. Those of us serving councillors now, our legacy. I don't want this legacy to be mine. You can count me out of this. I don't want to be part of this. I've been a councillor for many years and I've lived in Basingstoke most of my married life. I've seen it develop from the legacy of a too hasty transformation from Market Town to London Overspill and to the far more appealing and erudite town that we have today. Why are we considering undoing all that and reigniting the pejorative reputation that we had in the 60s and 70s? We have now transformed ourselves into a key hub for technical industry, a place for business, a place for the world-class concert hall, a place to come and shop. And by the way, we want to encourage, not discourage, the post-COVID revival of Festival Place. Basingstoke has become a place to be proud of. And I fear that we might be taken for fools and give away a prime piece of employment land to a delusion that will come back to haunt us. We mustn't behave like the dog with a bone. We have in our grasp the vision for a gateway to Basingstoke that could elevate our town, that could bring more reasons to be proud, that could bring a real variety of jobs and could be designed with visual appeal in mind as well as function, maybe even a state-of-the-art hospital. Do we drop this vision for another bone, for warehouses, a complex that offers actually, and I'll say it again, comparatively few jobs for its size? Whatever we're told tonight to get approval, it is a fact that possibly the biggest distribution company of all, and you know who they are, is moving towards machines, robots, driverless vehicles, even delivery drones. This complex will also mess up an already inadequate motorway junction, make life ghastly for the many who have to live in its shadow. It will ruin the lives of people who live in 3 lovely cottages. It will churn lorries onto our roads and will return us to the bad old days of mockery. And if our borough is going to fulfill its promise to become carbon neutral by 2030, it's not going to happen with this. We've only heard vague aspirations. They can say what they like tonight, can't they? They can say what they like. I don't want to be responsible for any part of this legacy. We must plan for a better future than this offers. I'm sure members, you're clever enough to recognise what's going on here. There's a saying that gives advice to a child. If you want your parents to buy you a dog, start by asking for a pony. And I think this describes this unusual sequence of applications from the same applicant quite well. They've asked for the pony and now they're expecting the dog. And I'm sure there'll be more to come. So let me just say, please don't let people make fools of us. Let's exercise wisdom and judgment, not make vital decisions based on what's happening in the middle of a pandemic. Stand up for our town and don't sell it down the river to the first offer. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. On time. Thank you. Questions to the ward councillor? Nope. Thank you very much, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Hannah Golding.
Thank you, Chair. This application, although smaller, will still have a significant impact on local landscape, and officers note this in their report, that it will have an adverse effect, but some mitigation can be used around the site. However, I cannot see how this can be valid, as the applicants will seek to develop the rest of the site as per the outline planning application you have wisely just refused, and I've seen nothing that would reassure me that this land would be protected in perpetuity in order to mitigate the landscape harm. It would continue to harm Dummer Village views and the local use impact which I referred to previously, thereby continuing not to meet the tests in EM1. The impact will especially be seen by the residents of Ganderdown, one of whom who unfortunately couldn't speak to you this evening, which I think is a real shame. It is suggested in the report that nothing is overlooked by the development, which in itself completely overlooks the fact that residents at Ganderdown cottages will be constantly overlooked by HGVs as they wait at the nearby Toucan crossing and the traffic lights that follow them. I would suggest that policy EM10 should still apply to this, as it is the primary proposed use of the building. And that's not to mention the noise and increased air pollution that they will experience, which I think many would agree makes the properties unfit for reasonable habitation. I would therefore ask that if the committee are minded to approve the application, which I hope they're not, that they add in specific requirements for this damage to be mitigated fully, and not by just putting up a big fence that blocks out all natural light. Another neighbouring use that the committee should consider is that the cemetery and crematorium are both based along the A30. You are being asked to approve that HGVs mix with hearses and then potentially ambulances all in one road. I would suggest that this is not sound town planning, and again goes up against policy EM1. HGV parking has already been discussed, but I personally don't feel reassured yet. It's not sufficient to enable people to take breaks. Tachograph regulations mean that they will have to rest for 45 minutes every 4.5 hours, and that they cannot drive for more than 9 hours. So these drivers will be on long journeys, and there is nothing in the proposal that supports long rest breaks. So naturally, drivers will find locations on local roads, as has been evidenced around other similar facilities in the country. The application mentions specific appointment times for HGVs, so if they arrive early or miss their original slot, they will also have to wait outside of the facility. Space for 20 vehicles at the entryway does not provide sufficient space given the pace of traffic flow mentioned in the application. I also have concerns around the economic assessment and the promise of jobs. I totally understand how appealing this offer is, especially at this time, but the numbers are not consistent. On page 296, the applicant has stated that it is their intention to use robotics for the mezzanine floor space of this development. However,
just under 1 minute.
Thank you, Chair. The assessment provided by the developer has excluded this and assumed there will be no robotics rate. And yet you heard this evening that automation was going to be 60%. Where an application cannot agree with itself about the use of robotics, something that we know is the goal of the distribution industry, how on earth can committee be satisfied tonight that the number of jobs promised is accurate and would be retained over time? Are we being given figures for an 100% human workforce when they only ever intend to provide 40% of these? This is a vital point that underpins the entire officer recommendation, because at this stage it's about offsetting acknowledged harm against potential benefit. Had the applicant been upfront about their prospective tenant, then the committee might have some more reliable information, but this is being kept hidden in a way that suggests it would harm committee's view of the future use rather than support it. So therefore this evening I would ask that committee do refuse this application, because the balance is far more in favour of harm to landscape, environment and local traffic rather than to the benefit of our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions for the ward councillor? No, thank you very much indeed, councillor. Councillor Terry Reid, please. Councillor Reid.
Councillor Miller, sorry, Councillor Reid has left the meeting. She's no longer in the meeting.
Okay. Then I will move on to questions to officers. As the speakers have finished there, I go back to what I said earlier, and we've got the members' briefing notes that were sent out today. But any more questions to officers? Councillor George.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know where we're going to be going on this one when it comes to debate, but I'd like just to have kick a little bit of an option open here. I think the applicant has been very
yeah, is there a question to officers, please, Councillor George?
There is indeed, if I may.
Give the question, please.
The question is very simply, is the applicant has been very determined in terms of meeting BREEAM excellent standards. That's what they're aiming for. And if you look at the documentation, it's very clear that fundamentally if they don't achieve that, they're going to be very good. The question I've got is, if we look at the proposed condition 34, I don't see that actually and ensuring that those are met in any way or shape or form. And I was going to ask that question because what it seems to suggest, condition 34, that if the applicant doesn't meet the excellent rating score, they just have to explain why. But it doesn't say that there's any real requirement to meet the very good standard at all. So the question is can we not toughen that up to ensure that they do meet the that standard as very good, on the basis that that's what they're proposing at the stage, very strongly putting forward to us.
Thank you for that. So condition 34 on page 343, it refers to meeting excellent in terms of standards of water consumption. That is covered by a policy in the local plan. With regards to the BREEAM excellent rating for the building, we don't actually have a policy that we could apply that would make that appropriate. The condition is worded that it says that they have to demonstrate endeavours to achieve an excellent rating. I mean, the agent spoke to you earlier in the just a minute ago, and she was saying that the building has scored an excellent rating. I mean, you could tighten up. You could either say that it has to, as a minimum, meet very good and show that they have done best endeavours to meet the excellent rating. You could add that in there. You could add some additional wording to make it a bit more positive in that regard, and particularly in light of what the agent said tonight with regards to how the building has currently been tested in terms of what rating score it will achieve. Then that's something that members could consider if they wish to.
Well, thank you. I think given the statements that have been made, I think that would be good, because the way that's written at the moment, very cynically, you could come up with any BREEAM rating and just explain the reasons for it, and it would still conform to that condition. So I would perhaps consider that, you know, should we move forward with this, that's something we consider very strongly.
Thank you, Councillor George. And any more questions to officers, please? And Councillor McCormack, followed by Councillor Bound, followed by Councillor Robinson.
This is a bit of a long shot, this one, but mention was made of the loss of oak trees. Within the legal confines of what conditions we can impose, is it realistic to have a condition that says that oak trees should be transplanted? I'm conscious that it takes 50 or 60 years for new ones to grow.
Whilst not an expert, I would say the answer to that would be no. We wouldn't be able to replant very mature oak trees elsewhere on the site.
Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. Very quickly, a couple of councillors have mentioned the closeness of housing, not gander down cottages, closeness of housing to the building. How far away would, presumably, the new golf course will be, or Hounston Fields, how far away would they be?
I mean, the golf course is too far away in the other side of Peacock, so that wouldn't be in proximity. The closest one would be Hounston Fields. As I understand it, it's the other side of the road. If we had the location plan up, I could possibly show you where, but the reserve matters for that lower portion haven't even been submitted yet, so I can't tell you exactly. So if you look, I can't point, I don't think. So where you have the existing traffic light, where the junction of the A30 Winchester Road meets the A30, there's a field to the north along there, and it all runs all the way down to Trenchard's Lane, is the southwestern boundary of Hounston Fields.
You're muted, Councillor Bound.
Some considerable distance. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Simple question. How much of this building will be visible from Dummer?
None, because it's sunk into the ground and because of the topography that's existing.
Okay, thank you.
I've got a question. I'm coming back to this 80 oaks. Are 80 oaks going to be taken out if this application is approved?
Yes, they would be, yeah.
Thank you. Any more questions to officers? Councillor George, give you a second chance.
Thank you. It's just a very minor one, but I don't know where we're going. If we look at the update paper, page 23, just a point on that, the conditions 22 and 23, we may need to re-look at those, because if you look at the revised condition 23, it refers to a condition 22C, which if 22 is changed, does no longer exists. So it's just a point, you know, I don't want to move down the line and approve this as part of the proposed test when it clearly refers to a condition which doesn't exist or won't exist.
So
if I can just, excuse me, sorry, if I can just clarify, 22 still exists, it's just reworded because we've had the remediation strategy already submitted. It then becomes the 22 becomes the new one on page 23 of the update. So it's still right for 23 to cross-reference back to that.
Well, yeah, I agree, but there's no condition 22C.
Indeed, you're right. Sorry, I do apologise.
So it's just a bit of paperwork, but
Right, if there's no more questions, we move to debate. Who would like to start this? Councillor McCormack.
I'll leave it for others to move or second either way on this. I'm in two minds about this, to be honest. I'm conscious that we have an officer recommendation before us, but you know, the impact of just half of this scheme is going to be colossal, and it is one of those things where, you know, once we go down that road, there's no turning back. That part of our borough will be changed forever. But I'm also conscious that, you know, there's a lot of good jobs potentially, some paying more than others, and jobs is what we need in this borough at this point in time. I do have to say I was a little bit disappointed to hear one of the ward councillors talk the town down in terms of the 60s and 70s new town. It's very easy to knock our town's history. I can trace my family back on my mother's side over 300 years in Basingstoke, and my granddad Arthur Atwood was one of the instrumental people in getting the new town agreement signed and getting those plans up together. And the new town by and large worked, and it was in response to a massive housing crisis at the end of the Second World War that we trebled the size of the town, and it was very well planned, and it worked very well right up until about the year 2000, when traffic started to overcome the infrastructure it couldn't cope. We could do a lot worse with the current proposals, not all of which we're considering tonight, before us in this part of the town. It's incumbent on us to make the right decisions now, and on that aspect, I think we're all aligned with the local ward councillors. But I think we've got a very tricky decision to make tonight in terms of the jobs that will be needed because of the massive economic impact of this crisis, you know, factors that are out with our control. And if this scheme doesn't go here, what is the likelihood that it will go elsewhere on the M3 or the M4? Because there is clearly demand for warehousing, given the accelerated shift between premises retail in places like Festival Place and online retail. So, you know, I'm still on the edge on this one, to be honest, and it will be up to other members' points for me to make my final conclusion.
Councillor Barnes.
Well, likewise, myself, I agree with Councillor McCormack. I'm waiting to see what other people have got to say, but I said on the last application that I felt that there were good points to the application, and those points probably are even more so this time round. I am quite impressed by the BREEAM compliance side of the scheme, in that they're going to generate an awful lot of their own power there. It is going to provide many jobs and apparently apprenticeships, according to the papers. It's close to the M3 as well, which I think is a big plus in its favour. The lorries don't have to travel too far to get to the site. In spite of what councillors have said, I think on the previous application, as far as I read from the papers, there are no other sites coming forward in the Sheller for such a site, and this site is of an ideal size to accommodate what's coming forward. We apparently do need a greater allocation of B8 jobs under EP1. So there are an awful lot of pluses there, but at the same time, of course, there are the impact upon the landscape. But I am encouraged that there's no view of the site from Dunner, so there's no need for the bund. But I shall now wait and see what other people have got to say.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think the word Councillor Taylor used, common sense, was 2 words she used. We've got a landscape issue here. Our landscape officer on page 257 of the report sums it up as its size and design scale, etc. The urban design officer is on page 265 is not particularly happy, and I'm actually almost mortified by no objection from environmental health on regards, not even a mention of air pollution. Noise, yes, there's mitigation, which we discussed in the previous application, which I have to say is totally unsustainable, particularly for those cottages. I was trying to be helpful, but it's obviously not before us, so it's totally irrelevant, and that is the location of the entrance. If it had been the roundabout down near those traffic lights, I walked the site, that's perfectly feasible. That could have brought lorries in and out of the site much quicker and are not affecting too many people. So we would just be faced with the sheer size of the building. Now, you know, the size of the building, it's massive. I've looked at other sites like this. You've got a massive warehouse of a very similar design, East Midlands Airport, but there's the key. Is that an airport? It's alongside many, many other distribution warehouses, obviously the airport being a central hub for the UK, but it blends in with its surroundings there because they're all warehouses. I'm concerned about the jobs, the validity of the statements. Okay, yeah, I like the idea of apprenticeships. I mean, that will serve the future. It certainly won't help right now because it's going to take a while for people to be qualified. And I would say that the skills, the control engineers and the high level technical jobs, they want those right now once it starts. And those, I'm afraid, those skills will probably come from all over Hampshire because it's so accessible a site in terms of commuting that those skills will be bought. And so I'm sad to say I don't think we're going to get great value jobs. I think manufacturing is a thing of the past, sadly. That would have been a great thing on the site, but we haven't got that. And then finally, 80 oaks. Yeah, I mean, that's a massive, and we're going to plant a few trees, which we know in 20 or 30 years might actually put back some of the carbon that these wonderful trees are busy absorbing as we speak. But so that's a concern. And again, we've just passed as this committee a Motorola site in Viables. We put 2 big warehouses in there. So there were some distribution warehousing, not on such a large scale, I admit. So we must be adding towards our take up. So yeah, I mean, I'm very mixed here. I think given a better entrance, it would have taken away half the problems that I see. And even if it had sunk into the ground a little bit more, but again, I take the point, it won't be seen from Dummer. So I just think it's not a good enough application as it stands. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Tomlin. Any other contributions? Councillor Robinson, followed by Councillor George, followed by Councillor Harvey, followed by Councillor Franklin.
Thank you, Chair. The closeness of the housing to this site I see as irrelevant. In Chinham and in Lichbit, we have got industrial sites immediately adjacent to residential sites. It's not a problem, providing the highway network allows the industrial sites to operate without affecting the residential sites. So I really can't sort of kick it out if I want to on that. The effect of this on Ganderdown cottages is horrendous. There is no other word. And I think if this goes forward, sorry, my iPad decided to do something else all on its own. If this goes forward, I think the developer should offer to buy Ganderdown cottages at a sensible valuation. I think they owe that to the people who own and live in those cottages. I think they should offer to buy them and give them reasonable compensation to move to somewhere more suitable. I think it's good that this is going to get called in to the Secretary of State. But right now, for myself, I can't come up with a reason to refuse it, which I think will stand up in planning law. That's where I am with it. So I'm probably in about the same place as certainly Councillor McCormack. I'm right on the fence. Thank you.
Councillor George.
Thank you, Chair. And back again, I think the jobs are very important. I think, given where we are with the economy and things, clearly this smaller portion of the site which doesn't have the same visual impacts and what have you is a very positive thing. That's on the positive side of things. Very good. I am still concerned slightly about the traffic issues, despite the issues or the the assessments that have been done. We are, frankly, this is a B8 use we're going for, and the fact that the use of the site for HGVs to HGVs is clearly just going to be based on conditions. And I asked a few questions tonight about that, and hopefully we can control it, but trying to control its use by, should we say, controlling on-site car parking seems a little bit of a stretch, a little bit. It possibly can be done. It's possible, but we've got to enforce it. If this is going to continue to be a B8 site for many years, and we don't know exactly who's going to come on there. So I think we need to look at that very carefully. But I am encouraged that it possibly can be achieved. So overall, again, I'm very much on the fence on this one. I don't know which side to come down on at the moment, and again, I'd like to hear what other people have to say.
Fine, thanks very much. Members, it's currently 9:34, and I have to ask the committee that if we continue, I would like to set a time of 30 minutes from now, 10:05, to complete and determine this application. Is that agreed? We'll extend standing orders, but that's our limit in 30 minutes time. Thank you very much. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is an incredibly difficult application to consider. If we had the preferred occupier in a joint presentation with the landowner, it may well have put a different complexion on the application that's in front of us. Because in spite of that, we then have to take into account the guarantees and the commentary given in their absence about the jobs that will be created and the guarantees that are being offered, because the Section 106 agreement will be with the landowner in their isolation, not with their preferred occupier. And I think that is a really important distinction on the jobs point. We can only give permission to that which is within the red line, that which is in front of us. And it is not the preferred occupier who is seeking permission for this site, it is the landowner in that sense. Therefore, the commitment to apprenticeships and guarantees are given in the landowner's name, not in the preferred occupier's name. And I feel that is very important, actually, in consideration of these matters. So our town, our borough, is not guaranteed the jobs by the occupier, only by who is presenting the application to us this evening. The 80 oaks are an important matter, and I don't think it can be easily overlooked that that level of tree, the importance of those trees in the context of the site itself can be lost. I mean, that's a really important point, I think, again. And the context of the landscape proposals, where our landscape officer is saying there is insufficient mitigation set against the scale of the built proposal. There is an overall element of mitigation that isn't met. Our urban design officer talks about the fact that this is a gateway site to the borough, and that the idea of a shed in the context of a gateway site to the borough is not necessarily appropriate for the vision that the borough has articulated that we can give some weight to, and only some weight as far as the Cabinet's decision. I think the urban design officer talking about the scale and massing and appearance would not constitute an attractive building fitting to the gateway is an important point raised. The fact that it's logistics and it's next to a road network, I understand. But again, the urban design officer states that logistics buildings by their very nature and design are indicative of storage and distribution. That's what their function is. Therefore, if you are coming into Basingstoke, that is what you will see. Welcome to Basingstoke, here's a warehouse. So there is a context to the vision we set to the gateway to our town, let alone to our borough. So I think, as others have said eloquently this evening, there are both pros and cons against this application, and it really is not easy. The jobs element is really important. The landscape element is really important. The ecology and the green issues associated with all the debate this evening is equally important. And I think, if anyone's coming to a conclusion one way or the other, I think it's going to be difficult. You all said it, and I'm in the same place as you really on this. I just think the location is something that we've got to think about. I just wish this wasn't the location that these jobs were being proposed in. I say that again, as I said on the first application. I think, if we were talking about another more appropriate place in the borough for this sort of development, it would be a far easier decision to make. But that's the battle I'm having at the moment in trying to come to a conclusion on this application with the weighing up the pros and the cons.
Right, thank you very much. Anne, yes, Crooked, go ahead.
Yeah, I wonder if I can just come back on something Paul said. The legal requirements of the Section 106 agreement will be to have an employment skills plan, both for the construction jobs and also for the warehouse jobs. And the requirements in the legal agreement will bind not only the owners of the land, but any the subsequent occupier of the unit in question.
Thank you, because that answers the question I asked actually at the briefing when we had it, and I appreciate that.
The other page I'd like to refer members to is on page 333, which I think I mentioned at the briefing as well, is the planning balance and overall conclusion to this application and the kind of weight we should apply. This is an officer's advice from a planning perspective on the various elements itemized on 824, paragraph 8.24. And we've talked about several of the issues in there, and it gives you a steer, I think, onto the weight that we should apply to this particular application. Right, Councillor Frankham.
Thank you. I'm pretty much the same as everybody else. Whichever way we go, we're either going to be hero or villain to many of the residents. But that's why we're councillors. We're here. We've got to make a decision. I'm very concerned about the oak trees, given that they are 100 years old and more, many of them. Also, when you consider the size of the site, if you were going to make it an industrial site, is 1,400 jobs really that labour intensive? Could we not do more? Get more jobs? It's really, really difficult. And like everybody else, I'm listening to what everybody else says. And 1 minute I'm one way, the next minute I'm another. I don't quite get how it would affect the hospital, because some are saying it's good and some are saying it's bad. I don't know. Perhaps somebody could enlighten me on that. But at the moment, I really don't know which way to go. And this is probably my final decision as a councillor after 23 years. And it's a tough one. And I love our borough and I want it to thrive. So I'm ready to listen. I'm ready to be persuaded. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Frankham. I'm going to ask a question of officers again. There have been many mentions of I think it's more aimed at the hospital and the vision that's been agreed at locally within the council about the vision for Junction 7. If I could ask some advice from officers to explain to the committee precisely how that factors into our decision making today. I'm getting a few nods around the meeting tonight. Just to clarify this, please.
Absolutely, thank you, Chair. And it would just to be clear, it would have applied equally on. You'll have seen the reports are almost identical on the two applications on this regard. But effectively, the issue is that clearly it's been raised both sort of for and against the application. So those who are against the application have raised the point that there could be a prejudicial impact on a potential hospital site. Those proposing the application have made the point that, well, actually, the roundabout and access follows very closely the previous critical care unit access and actually could provide access to it in future. I think the key issue for the committee is to consider the planning weight that you can place on that. And I think the issue is, and as we set it out in the report, is that the council's vision statement talks about clearly a hospital in that potentially in that broad location, but it's not a planning policy document. It hasn't gone through the same processes as a development plan document or an SPD or any development brief. So there's limited planning weight that can be put on that. If you then look at the issue of and we cover it in the report, the issue of, I guess, prematurity, i.e. what could be the prejudicial impact on that. Our assessment is that under paragraph 50 of the MPPF, it references the fact that prematurity will seldom be a reason for refusal. Particularly, I'd say in this instance where actually that scheme doesn't form a committed development in the planning sense of the terms. It's not an allocated site. It's not an application, and as far as I'm aware, it's not actually been a site which has actually been identified formally yet as a chosen site. So on that basis, I think there's no grounds, if you like, to follow a sort of prematurity issue, albeit that I can understand entirely why it's before, in members' minds and of concern. But I think strictly in planning terms, there is no matter around prematurity that could be pursued, Chairman.
Thank you for that. I hope that helps members of the committee. Do I have any other contributions to the debate? Councillor Potter.
Thank you, Chair. Just reading papers again as we've been sitting here. I mean, I think in terms of the landscape officer comments, which have been alluded to more than once, the proposed development by virtue of its scale, form, design, siting and location would result in the introduction of a substantial incongruous built form into the rural countryside. I have agreement with that. I think really I've said it before, I just don't think this is the right site for this type of development really. And in terms of planning visual impact, I think this is contained somewhere else in what Councillor Taylor said somewhere, in environmental impact, and I agree with Councillor Tomlin. I think I was surprised that environmental colleagues had no comment to make about pollution really in terms of their commentary. Were all key considerations, none of which I think have been overcome, and I really do not find it an attractive application. But I understand very well, obviously, the seduction of the possibility of the jobs that this may create, etc. But there are all sorts of caveats attached to that, really. But in terms of the vision that we have for Basingstoke and the type of impression you give as you drive into this very splendid town of ours, I think should be something different to this, really. So those are my comments, Chairman.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. If the hospital goes ahead the other side one day, maybe, it changes the landscape issues, because if there's a hospital the other side of the road, it changes the whole landscape area. So, and the effect on the hospital and the traffic that Councillor Golding raised up, going in and out there, is a massive issue with this. And that's something that we can't consider because it's not in our brief tonight. But I think it's something that should be considered. And whatever happens with this application tonight, it's called in by our MPs. So actually, the final decision isn't going to rest with us. It's going to rest with somebody else. But we've got to make a decision tonight, and it's 10 to 10. So for that reason, and that reason only, so that we have a vote and we get this over with, I move the opposite officer recommendation, sadly. Thank you.
Mike?
Councillor, I just want to confirm, just for absolute clarity, that the request for call-in is there, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the Secretary of State will exercise that right. So effectively, yes, it is. It would have to be communicated to the Planning Casework Unit for that decision about whether to call in would be made. It doesn't mean that the Secretary of State necessarily would call the application in, irrespective of the decision made tonight. So I just wanted to clarify that point. It hasn't actually been called in yet. It's considering a request for call-in.
Okay, I appreciate that, Mike. But at least there is it is going to go to another process after us, whether it should be called in, and that in itself is another process after what we decide tonight. I'm only calling it in. I'm only moving the recommendation basically so that we make a decision tonight and we go forwards. Yeah, I'm still on the fence personally, so I'm not recommending it. I'm calling it. I'm moving it to move forward.
Right. Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Goodison.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'd like to second Councillor Robinson's proposal. And I'd just like to point out that as a retail hub, Basingstoke is suffering at the moment. These jobs are going to be very important, very necessary on the issue of biodiversity, landscaping, environment, and all that sort of thing. The impact is, in my view, small compared with the hundreds of houses which are going on the golf course and handsome fields. So I think, I know it's 40 football pitches, but compared with the thousands of houses going up all over the place, their impact is far worse. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goodison. Right. Proposed and seconded for approval of the officer's recommendation for approval. And I'll go through the, yes, Sue?
Could I just, before you go to vote, can I just ask for clarity with regards to condition 34 and the points raised by Councillor George with regards to BREEAM, and whether you would want that condition amended so that it says that it refers to achieving a minimum very good standard and trying and best endeavours to move to excellent standard, BREEAM standard.
Sounds good to me.
That's okay. If you're agreed to that, Councillor Robinson?
Yeah, I've agreed to that.
And Councillor Goodison?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Yes is the answer. Thank you, Sue. And thank you, Councillor George, for your nodding. Right, I'm going to take the vote. I will go through and I'll start with Councillor Leeks. This is for the officer's recommendation for approval.
Chair, I think he's gone off the meeting. He's not visible anymore.
Okay. Well, right, he's not here. Councillor Goodison,
For.
Councillor George,
For.
Councillor Grant,
For.
Councillor Frankham,
Sorry, 4.
thank you. Councillor Harvey,
Against.
Councillor Robinson,
For.
Councillor Bound,
Reluctantly against.
Councillor Potter,
Against.
Councillor Tomlin,
Against.
Rennie,
I have 5 for the recommendation and 4 against.
I haven't voted yet.
Councillor McCormack,
4.
thank you.
Sorry,
Don't know
that's
why.
you 6 for the recommendation, 4 against.
Thank you very much. That's approved. Officers,
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm that the application is approved, subject to the amendments to the conditions on the update paper and also the agreed amendments to condition 34 with regards to the BREEAM standards.
right, thank you very much. I think this was a very difficult application to consider tonight, and thank you very much for your input. It really is one that was marginal. I think we can all come to that kind of agreement, but we will see what the next process brings. That's about all I can say about that. Thank you very much for your tolerance tonight. I appreciate it. And I'll see you on the 28th when we have hopefully a fairly routine DC. We have 8 at the moment. I think it's 8 we have on the agenda, but they are what we would term fairly routine applications. So thank you very much, and safe journey. It might be a bit cold outside. Well, it certainly is for me.
I'm not going anywhere.
Thank you, committee.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.